Be advised that this show is not for the faint of heart, easily offended, or children of any age. The opinions and information expressed in this podcast are intended for entertainment purposes only. Deviant Robot provides no guarantee as to the accuracy, completeness, currentness, or validity of this content. Like many things in life, don't take it too seriously and stop using if irritation develops.
I genuinely love that intro music. It's like defining my Friday, but from now on, it's never going to seem quite the same without seeing Dali literally rocking out in the corner of my little thumbnail there. That was quite something. I'm sorry you guys missed that. It turns out the best content on this stream has already passed, and you missed it. I'm so sorry, but that was it. Hello, everybody. How are you? Hope everybody has a fantastic, fabulous Friday feeling. And we are here today with the marvelous Dali down here. Oh, wait, down there. And the equally... Oh, no, this is a real 50-50. Shoot. Okay, here we go. No, fail. The lovely, charming Reid from Cordial. How are you doing, Reid?
Hey, doing well, thanks.
Excellent. So, hello. So, what are we doing today? So, there's a couple of things I want to talk about today. I want to talk about basically street epistemology and the definition of what street epistemology is, which is a perennial subject for me, I know. I'm sure many of you have heard me talk about this on various streams and discussion sessions and what have you, and just ranting to strangers in the street. It has been a topic that's been something I've been keen to talk about for quite some time. And I think it's an important topic. What is street epistemology? And I think it's important because if you don't know what it is, it's hard to know whether you should care about it, whether you would recommend it to other people, whether you want to do it, whether you want to support it. It's hard to defend it against maybe some of its critics if you can't really truly understand what it is, or say definitively that it's not what they think it is. There's all kinds of challenges to not knowing what street epistemology is. So I think having an understanding of it and having a definition for it and sort of building up an identity for it is useful and important for the community. So that's kind of partly why I've been so enthusiastic about it. And so there's a few different things we want to talk about along those lines, but one of the first things I'd like to do is talk about this sort of new form of street epistemology, which is it officially called Spectrum SE? Is that and who gave it that name?
That was the original name I gave it because I took a large inspiration from the Jubilee channel, and they called that format Spectrum. So I'm
Gotcha.
just
Cool.
adding SE to that.
Excellent. So Spectrum SE. So we've got an example. I'm sure many of you have already seen this, but we've got an example from one of Reid's recent videos, which you can see in full on his channel. But we're just going to play a segment here, and in this segment, I think we're making some interesting points right at the beginning. We're not going to review all of this. We're largely going to talk over the top of it, but we'll just show a snippet to give you guys some context about what we're talking about.
Clarifying terms quite.
So let's get on neutral. Want me to do this too? Or should I be completely neutral and just ask questions?
Should I be neutral?
If you're into SE, and as long as two SE people talk to each other, it's usually fine.
Okay.
It's usually fine to be civil.
I see.
And I don't have to be as neutral.
Okay.
So when I stand in the line here, I'm neutral and face this way, or
All right.
Start in the middle.
Oh, okay.
And then
Okay. You want me to start
And then
here?
I'll cut.
Okay.
I'll start here.
I see. So you are recording, and this has the potential to end up as video.
You can let me know if you don't want it to go anywhere.
I don't have a problem with it. I just wanted to make sure that.
Yes.
Okay.
It is recording.
All right. Yeah, I'm fine with that. So you
Okay.
just want me to read it, and then you'll go 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It's okay for drag queens to perform for children.
3, 2, 1, go. Where are you going?
I think I'm going to be here at slightly disagree.
Okay,
Am I
so
here,
I think
or
from there we
I
get
don't know.
the general gist of the mechanics.
Let's disambiguate one of these.
I'm laughing. So I'm really glad that actually you didn't start the video there. You started with this really sweet preamble where this gentleman had obviously had sort of come across SE or was interested in SE, and then sort of you guys were negotiating the logistics of it and his confusion about what was happening. I thought that was really, really nice. But yeah, so Reid, would you like to give us a sort of a thumbnail of how you would describe Spectrum SE as, I guess, how it differs from whatever standard SE is?
Yeah, I guess this version is a more collaborative, less neutral version of SE, where I'm basically doing SE, but more visually with the confidence scale on the ground. And we both, as we're discussing the claim and the reasoning, we can move based on what we're saying. And that can just be a better visual for the video. And I'm asking basically the same questions I usually ask, defining the terms and then getting the reasons. And once we have that, we can then kind of reset the game and do the whole spectrum format for each reason and how well the reason is connects to the original claim. So it's an interesting visual way to do SE. And
you've got this board that we can see right now where you're sort of getting your conversation partner to write down their various components of their claim, and they're adding them to the board, and you've got different colors, I think, for pros and cons, I guess. Is that?
Yeah, the green are for the pro reasons, red is for the counter reasons, white is for definitions or anything we need to define.
Right. And you're drawing connective lines to sort of as almost creating a mind map of those reasons and how they connect to the various components of the conversation.
Yeah, I'm trying to actually map out what I'm always doing in my head, but just having it be there visually so I don't have to keep it in my head the whole time.
Gotcha. So do you find that's just an aid for you, or is it actually adding to the process itself?
Yeah, I'm still experimenting, and I think it's adding things. It might be, I chop out all of the stuff where we're kind of just adding stuff to the board and nothing is happening. I chop that out so it's better for the video. But once we have it there, I think it does add clarity. It helps with the structure, and at the end we can evaluate the structure of it and see if there's anything missing, like an assumption we need to add or some other reason for a reason.
Gotcha.
I think the
Dali,
lines. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to ask because you've participated in this. So yeah, I was going to ask for your thoughts.
I have not fully understood what the lines are necessarily for. I think they would be useful in the more complex conversations. And in the simple ones, the lines simply denote what's already obvious just by the layout to me. The lines would start to matter if I had a line going to a reason, and at the same level I had a supporting reason that should have a line directly between, as opposed to being directly linked to the claim, something like that. I think there's some of that, and
you're talking specifically about the lines that are connecting the concepts on the board,
Right.
not the lines on the floor. Gotcha.
right. Now the lines on the floor are just a fixed scale,
Mhm.
and I really like 7. I think 7 is the best for psychological reasons.
Seven is a good number as a confidence scale. 7's good because you've got that perfect middle, and you can go
Yes.
to either extremes. Gotcha. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
and essentially it's 7 with a pair of it's a neutral with a pair of 3s on each side, and
Yeah.
the 3s are enough nuance to talk about being strongly or weakly, and I think more than that is confusing, and less than that, and also I think we have a preference for prime numbers, and 7 is in a sweet spot.
Interesting. Do you find people wanting to stand in the middle of between lines? Do we feel that the scale is just is more analog than it necessarily suggests? Is I'm kind of leaning a little bit, literally leaning from between the lines. Are people trying to eke out more nuance from this line?
I usually say it's a rule you have to stand on a line, but I haven't
Gotcha.
seen people attempt to stand in the middle yet.
Yeah, yeah. It seemed to be a big rule for Peter when he did it, and I, in so far from what I've seen between what Reid and I have done, nobody has tried to fudge or stand in the middle of it. They're clear.
So one of
But
my
we're doing it in
criticism.
college, so that, or a university, that probably changes the attitude toward a scale.
Right, and standing in line.
Yeah.
So one of the criticisms, I guess, I leveled at this when I saw Peter doing it early on, and I heard you mention it as well, Reid, is describing it as a game, and I'm wondering why that sort of term feels like it fits here.
I don't know. It depends on what your definition of game is. I think of it as a fun thing to do, a fun activity, building up the argument map for some claim. That keeps it in a collaborative frame, but also some games are competitive. So
Right.
I'm not sure. It helps people. It helps lower people's defenses, at least for busking people.
Right. Yeah.
It's easier. I think it deals with multiple people. That's a point. In this particular example, Reid is acting as the second person, but this game works really well from 2 to 5 people. It's actually not as good with 1 as it is with 2. And that's I think one of the main differences how this is different than regular SE, which is a one-on-one, pretty strict interview situation, whereas this is exploiting the differences between people's opinions to find nuance. Yes, I'm using words like exploiting.
That wasn't the word I was going to pick up on. I'm okay with words like exploiting, I guess, depending on what they're preceded and contextualizing. So I guess my concerns with it being a game might be a sense of like competition, but also a sense that people could be winning or losing. It would almost, if you were to call it a test, it would carry, I think, a really concerning connotation, right? And I think a game in some ways might carry a similar but not as strict version of that. But I think, that's one thing. And the other thing I think is interesting is one of the things that's very important when you're playing a game or participating in a game is to understand the context so that you can be good at the game, not just understand the basics of the rules, but then sort of get the game. Even a simplistic set of rules can lead to a complex game where you suddenly realize, oh, hang on a minute, there's some nuance here, there's some interplay between these rule sets. So I think in some ways, I guess it might make me concerned that people might feel that there's more to the dynamics of what's at play here than simply just standing on a line in line with your opinion. And so, I've definitely felt like Peter in his Spectrum SE was sort of alluding to things like he seemed to be making, I mean, this is probably definitely an unfair criticism because this was some of the first times you guys were rolling this out and experimenting with it. So, but I definitely saw him sometimes suggesting that there were rules that he hadn't fully explained by saying, you can't move just yet, or you feel free to move at any time, but there's no real context to why that would happen or what you would do that in response to. And so, I guess that just leads to my main concern with it is that it just seems to add a lot of complexity. So I imagine that the main value that you're getting from this is the visual spectacle. Like it's creating an event, that there's some space to it, there's some dynamism in the video content, but also in terms of what people are seeing as they're walking past. Oh, something's happening here, rather than just somebody with a clipboard having a conversation. Is there anything else that it's really adding to the experience other than those things?
Reid, you first.
Not sure.
I've got it ready. You can go next.
Yeah.
I think that, first of all, when there's a group of people, they almost always showed up together. It's not we're adding up people until we have a game. Because they showed up together, we ask them to stand on neutral, and then they have this dance of how much are they going to try to be influenced by the other person's perspective. There's this interchange that's going on between friends or between people that know each other well, and then they do influence each other where they're standing on the lines. And now we're going to ask them to directly, logically, verbally attempt to influence each other in the process. And there's this cooperative part to that. There's a game in it with almost a winners and a losers, but we never highlight the win or the loss. We highlight the process.
That's interesting. So I could see it possibly resulting, if a group of people turn up that actually happen to share a social relationship with each other, the nature of that relationship infers some kind of, oh, I don't really talk about these things, but so-and-so, she really loves talking about these things. She knows what she's talking about, and so I let her speak for me. Or perhaps just sort of, I don't really have much of an opinion about this, or that I disagree with my friends mostly on this, but I don't really ever take the time to explain that because we know that's just not the nature of our relationship or our friendship. I can imagine that when the 3-2-1 goes down, there is a lot of decisions about where to claim that you feel that you stand in this position that are not based on a true report of your own feelings, your own beliefs on the position, mm-hmm. but are actually influenced by the social dynamic. And I could imagine that the social dynamic then allows for people to find themselves standing somewhere they're not really comfortable with, and therefore maybe entering into the conversation to try to understand better why they are standing where they are standing. I could imagine that that's the case, but I think that's quite a complex social dynamic to rely on to give value to this exercise. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on sort of value adds, Reid?
Yeah, I think that helps if you have a group of people and they explore some belief that they potentially disagree about. They can get to know each other better. I remember I was editing the highlights for the Purdue event, and someone there said something about, I learned about the people I was there with, and that then I can support them better potentially. So there's some benefits there.
I like the idea that it normalizes within social groups talking about complex and difficult issues. Mm-hmm. I think that is genuinely worthwhile. Is that like a little remote control car that just went spinning off in the back? Sorry,
yes,
I distracted there.
It's not even remote control. It's actually a fully autonomous, self-driving robot.
Oh,
that
fantastic!
Goes around and delivers food to people.
Magic.
Here at the place, and it moves slow, and it manages to avoid pedestrians, and it's a self-driving car.
Excellent.
At pedestrian speeds.
I'm really going to try not to let that completely ruin my flame, but I really desperately want to ask more questions about that. So cool. I think I can see some, certainly I can see advantages in terms of, as I say, the visual spectacle. I can totally understand that visualizing and normalizing difficult conversations has a lot of value. I think that's all good stuff. I wonder though if it creates an unhelpful barrier to honest reflection, in the sense that, or not honest reflection, but just in the 3-2-1, even as we saw at the beginning of this video, when there was the 3-2-1, it wasn't like everybody suddenly snapped to their designated position. It was a case of people were looking around and sort of wondering and sort of shuffling and saying, well, I don't really know what this means. And that sort of, but then I'm wondering if people find themselves standing in a position and they've committed to it physically as well as just conceptually. I'm wondering whether people I guess
that's where you can demonstrate behavior of moving from a line. Like for example, when I'm explaining back, and I will ask, what sort of reasons would somebody standing here give me? So I'm asking to make it up. So it's obvious that this isn't my position because they're telling me what that is. And by demonstrating moving, it demonstrates that they can move in the process. There is very clearly a wordless negotiation about what lines they're going to stand on. It's not even getting away with it. It's almost exploiting that there's this in-group dynamic, in-group loyalty to stand on lines similar to each other. And then when you ask them to make up the reasons that would pull them apart or bring them together, that might be the game. Now, there's an important component to Spectrum in that it really tunes for the short version of SE. If you were doing one-on-one, it's the 5-minute version, where you boom, get to a steel man, maybe one hypothetical, and you're out. Whereas when I'm sitting down on a table with somebody, I can go really a lot longer and as far deep as they're willing, and that's and this does not allow for that.
This doesn't work for that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you get 3 people, it's going to be 10-12 minutes in this one, and you're really only getting to that shortest version of what SE is, which is great and useful, efficient.
So I can see Reid's board here is already amassing quite a spider diagram of different concepts and ideas. So I maybe Reid, would you agree that this is short form SE, or do you feel that this this has legs?
Short form essay? What do you mean?
So Dali was, I think, suggesting that this is most effective in a kind of short 5-minute version of SE, where you're just sort of doing a sort of, let's say, a high-level drive-by of somebody's epistemological views and sort of question, and giving them some interesting questions to think about, reflecting on where they might be standing in relationship to their friends, etc. And then it's sort of move on, as it were. I've certainly seen Peter go for an hour or so on these lines, with people increasingly being ignored or or just disconnected from the game in various moments. What are your thoughts on the sort of time frame that this game should play out on?
I think this can go fairly long, actually. I think this video was around 45 minutes.
Yeah,
and I could have gone even further. We were still talking about reasons, and yeah, if you start to have reasons for reasons, and then you defer on which reasons are good for reasons above it, you can do a lot in a lot of time.
So I feel like right now you guys are talking, because that one of the odd dynamics is, like, when you ended up, there was a point early in the video where I think you ended up standing on quite far apart positionally, because you entered the game, which is an interesting thing in and of itself, and I know you explained that that's maybe a fair thing to do if you're both interested in SE and you're both coming at this from a street epistemology mindset. Then actually you could potentially enter the game without influencing or affecting negatively perhaps the experience of the street epistemology. But that also at some points resulted in you being diametrically sort of opposed on a particular point, and then you were sort of talking at a really socially odd distance from each other, and that kind of was a bit odd. But now you seem to, when you were working collaboratively, you were literally coming together to talk about the position at the board, and now this feels like a standard distance. If you're no longer, you've sort of abandoned the spectrum and you're having the conversation at the board, I think.
Yeah, we use the spectrum to get our sense of our level of disagreement, and then we brainstorm reasons on our spots usually, and then we take our reasons for and against and put them on the argument map on the board.
Right. I feel like if there was a way that you could just carry Miro, which I know is your thinking out loud tool of choice, into these spaces, you would be so happy. And I understand that, because I think it's a necessary skill to be able to conceptualize, capture the things that are being said and connect them to wider ideas, and then show people how those connections may or may not relate to other things, or those justifications may, in one context be sufficient, in another context they've deemed that evidence to be insufficient, for example. That those kinds of experiences are very much, I think, that's what we do, right, in these SE conversations, is we build these mental structures and we try to follow the person's claims and positions and sort of notice things about them that we can point to within the context of that conversation. And having it on the board or having it in a Miro diagram makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so Spectrum SE. Do you guys feel like your experiments with Spectrum SE is are continuing, or do you feel like this is just a sort of an interesting digression, or do you think this is going to become a thing you guys build into your sort of standard? I'm going to go out to SE some people today, and I'm going to set my lines up, and this makes the conversation better.
I think we're going to continue experimenting. I just ordered a 2 foot by 8 foot runner, like little mats or rugs.
Oh wow!
We don't have to put tape on the ground, and that takes time.
Awesome.
Yeah. Right now, our setup is between 35 and 45 minutes, and we'd like to get that back down to 20.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds good. Well, I'm definitely interested to hear how it evolves, and just like everything within SE, like for example, I having this conversation about should it be called a game? Like that's an interesting conversation, but I guess that's sort of very much in the spirit of what street epistemology is all about, right? Like everything is up for challenge, everything's up for criticism and questioning and like refinement. And if there's a better way of doing it, then let's talk about that.
I can so defend calling it a game by it has rules and a format and a series of goals. And constrictions like only one person talk at once, and you should stand on a line specifically, and there's a format to it, but it's a format that's simple enough that people could play the game on their own. Somebody could say, "Hey, let's play this Spectrum game. Over here on the carpet is strongly disagree."
You mean they could adopt it because the concept is simple, not that they would play it on their own.
Even if they get it right or wrong, the whole idea that we could stand on the carpet and talk about these ideas and see if we can move each other and get the feedback as to the persuasion effect that we're having if they walk away with that, win.
Yeah, it's more a game for the SEers and the people that are just maybe the pawns or the pieces.
Oh no! They are so. We're asking them for creative input.
That's interesting. Yeah, well, I get that. That's kind of part of the observation here is that a lot of this is in service of the SE content and in service of the SEer. It's not necessarily in service of the individual participating. So, for example, as you mentioned, the board is there to sort of help you capture the mind map of the ideas that are being expressed. And whilst I think that definitely could help somebody, there are probably other people that maybe just don't feel that they want to engage in that kind of like visual exploration of ideas, and so maybe they wouldn't resonate with it as much. And I definitely think like the spectrum, like the physical spectrum makes for, and as I say, it's a great video. It adds presence. It adds like, that there's certainly an event going on over there and people will notice what's happening and they can ask questions about, hey, what are you guys doing here? I think it's really cool. And no doubt, like when you come to that board and you start to discuss those reasons, I think it's all genuine SE at that point. But yeah, I guess I just would be concerned that some of the complexity is more distracting for people than it is adding to their experience.
Yeah. Awesome.
So then I guess the question that we could ask is it SE? And if it is SE, then how do we know that it's SE? How would we determine? Because this is a different format. Like, so does that mean it's no longer SE? And if it is SE, what does that mean? So what can we say SE is and isn't? And this sort of leads to the definition. I'm assuming you guys would say this was SE, and I think I would say that it was also. I think the conversation is SE. I think it's an SE, sort of event, and seems to fit within the paradigms of helping people explore their ideas and challenge their epistemologies for their ideas. Is there any way that you guys would see this not being SE, or like if you had any criticisms of this approach where you've made you think maybe this is not the right way to go?
Yeah, if your questions differ from the main goal of reflection and go straight towards some kind of argumentative, super kind of persuasion, where you're not really listening, you're just using the whole format to potentially try to change someone's minds, not very sincerely. But going for that instead of reflection. Maybe that's part of it.
I think Spectrum is it's easier to fall out of SE playing Spectrum than it is at a table.
Interesting.
And it's really just about whether you're doing SE. Spectrum doesn't make it SE,
Right?
but SE can make Spectrum SE, I think.
Why do you say it's easier to fall out when you're doing Spectrum SE?
Multiple claimants, multiple players. I'll call them players because it's a game.
Pawns, I thought were.
No. Oh, they are queens. They are very powerful. And I'm a king. You'll notice I move more than one at a time, so I'm a queen.
Anyway, they're the castles. They can go left and right, or
right. Yes, rooks, castles, very powerful pieces. Yeah, you can lose control of things and have them by themselves go into a debate mode. I think it also requires the SEer to be more skillful, more experienced before they start. So I would suggest if you've not had at least 5 or 10 successful table conversations, you don't have to have a table. I mean, a one-on-one personal conversation goes successfully. You shouldn't start Spectrum yet. You're not ready.
Yeah. Another thing that could disqualify it is, since this does get people to visually show where they disagree, and they could be very much on the opposite sides, that could potentially risk rapport loss and incivility, which has happened, as you've seen in some of Bogosian's videos, which is interesting content, but that would make it not probably SE.
Yes, I definitely feel like the multiple participants component is a huge challenge to it being effective, and not just simultaneously trying to explore. From my perspective, I think street epistemology, when you're having a conversation with somebody and you're really focused on what they think and why, it's an effortful event, right? To try to understand somebody's mental models and follow them the way they followed them, so that you can add your insights into, I guess, their conclusions and suggest maybe they want to reflect on, maybe a inconsistency or logical gap that they have in their thinking somewhere. But to do that, you really need to empathize with their mental model, right? And it takes effort to try to understand somebody's mental model well enough that you can add value to it without making assumptions about what they think. You really know what they think. To do that with multiple people simultaneously seems very, very challenging, like very, very challenging. And because everybody's journey is different, I think. And yet there's a desire to, I think, for a lot of people to see them superficially the same.
Challenge accepted.
Well, yeah, just because something's challenging doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it may be suggestive that there might be less challenging, more effective ways to have the conversations. Right. I guess the question would be, like, you could do a 3-person Spectrum SE conversation and take say let's say there's half an hour. Or you could have a 10-minute conversation with each person individually. How effective do you think the impact on the individual would be in those two scenarios?
Not sure. There was one section in How Minds Change that talked about how when you gave someone like a logic problem and it's very, it's not very intuitive, and they usually get the wrong answer when they're by themselves. But if they put together someone with a group, and someone figures out what's happening, then that can just be easily brought up, and then the whole group comes together with the best reasons, and they don't get it wrong. So if you're working together with a couple of people, and someone brings out the best reason, then that could persuade the others to adopt that reason, or remove some potential bad reasons. They could explain to each other why they think something is the case, and just collaboratively get all that together.
I can understand how that could work for answers to questions that have right and wrong answers necessarily, but I'm not sure that those are the sorts of questions that we're really addressing in SE necessarily, right? We're often dealing with things that it's about justifications and reasons. It's not about knowing the truth, right? We try to avoid, I guess, the assumption of like, oh, we have the answer, we're just hoping you'll get there. That would be, in my view, a characteristic of what is and isn't SE. Like, it would be a differentiator for that.
I think you can be less wrong when you have
that's true.
better and worse reasons, and people can figure out if they have completely irrational reasons for something fairly quickly, and that would make them less wrong about the truth of the claim, hopefully.
Would group conformity be a good reason to change your mind on something?
Yes.
Oh, okay, interesting. Why do you say that?
The group is smarter than I am.
Okay.
It depends. If you're just taking an opinion poll from the group initially,
yeah,
that's something, but that's one thing. But if you have like a conversation about it and you discuss reasons and the quality of the reasons over time, and you end up, it's like a filter or a funnel. A lot comes out in the top, but only a few things remain at the bottom. I would rather have a few things that remain at the bottom to go with the my conclusion about it.
I had a filter level in terms of the people that I'm listening to as the group. If I find a bunch of people are well thought out on something, they're well informed, and then I look at that group consensus and join it, that's a good default place to start from, and then look for defeaters.
So to be clear, I think we're not saying that you should adopt the group decision because it's the group decision. We're saying that if you explore something as a group, it might be a more effective exercise than perhaps trying to explore it alone. Is that a way of framing it? Or do you literally mean we should adopt group decisions because they're likely to be better?
I would assume the group has gone through a rigorous process to arrive at their decision because they're in a group. And they could talk to each other about
the group is just a collection of individuals, right? So presumably
it's a low confidence default position. If I don't know better,
okay,
let me start with the group consensus on a group that seems to be well informed, and then look for defeaters and reasons to move away from that. And it's taking on a low confidence belief is easy to modify.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the group and what they're claiming and what process they use to get to their conclusions.
So to use the just ever so easy to go to example here, that's flat Earth. So you happen to have a group that have come out of a flat Earth convention, and is it likely that as a group, given they automatically have that predisposition to be attending a flat Earth community event or something, is it likely that group is going to be able to usefully help each other explore the reasons why they believe in the flat Earth in a meaningful way? Like, I'm wondering if they could say, well, this is the group decision. We all agree that this is the decision. This is the truth. It's not likely to be any better or worse than any one of them may express individually, is it?
Don't know. I would assume it would be a little bit better having a flat Earth argument if you went to a flat Earth conference rather than just thinking about it by yourself, and potentially.
So one thing I could imagine could be the case is that when people that seemingly superficially agree about a conclusion notice that they don't necessarily agree with the reasons that they got to that conclusion or the justifications for that conclusion, I think that can be useful and interesting. But then I think that's about a collection of people who have assumed, it's called in-group homogeneity. So there's out-group homogeneity and in-group homogeneity. And in-group homogeneity basically suggests that you are likely to assume that you agree with the people inside your group and that your reasons are broadly the same, even though that's not inherently actually true. And therefore, if you get people within the in-group to talk to each other about the details of their position, that you'll find that there's probably greater degrees of disagreement than would be at first assumed. So I think that could be an interesting point of reflection, is to encourage people to say, like, what are your reasons for believing this is true? But depending on the social hierarchy that we mentioned before, somebody confidently asserts a reason, you could imagine situations where other people would agree with that reason, even though they may not understand it or be familiar with it or it ever resonated with them, but it sounded confident, so they'll go along with that. So there's all those kinds of sort of social dynamics at play. And I wonder whether this really gets in the way of potentially having that meaningful one-to-one conversation.
Potentially. Yeah. The conformity risk there is that is a risk, but it's also really testing each other in a situation that's kind of close to what people would go through in real life if they had a view that they disagreed with their peers about. Doing it in this format would be much better than arguing about it or debating it in a dorm room. I think this would be a way to facilitate that potentially better.
Why do you think that? Well, why do you think it would be better to explore it through the focus? What part of the experience is giving that additional value then, other than exploring it just as a group of friends in a dorm room versus is it the spectrum? Is it the street epistemology tool set, or is it having the presence of a third party there that's just trying to remain neutral and challenge all of the assumptions?
Yeah, everything the SEer is doing through their attitude, they're keeping it civil, and they're mapping everything out and getting everything clear and mapped out. So the argument is represented well. And no one is actually debating each other. It's always the SEer getting someone's opinion and then moving to someone else. And there's less interruption. And there's, a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. It's modeling an alternative to the typical debate.
Yeah, I like the idea that the street epistemologist specifically is modeling open curiosity, and I think those two characteristics are really important. I think the idea that you've got someone there that you can't just that firstly is not somebody that's meaningfully part of your life. That's actually an interesting component, I think, which is interesting because I think a lot of people talk about SE as a tool for talking to family and loved ones, and I think it can be really useful in that space, and I don't want to take anything away from that, but I think that one of the very effective components of the frequent examples of street epistemology is the disposable nature of the social dynamic. I don't have to impress you. There's no real advantage to me lying to you. There's no real advantage to me trying to just tell you that I think X when I really think Y. There's nothing I'm going to get from this dynamic. I can be honest with you in a way that I might not be as able to be as honest with my immediate peer group and my family and my friends, which is interesting. And I think that part of that social dynamic is really important. So I could understand that from that perspective that it would be more effective, perhaps, having a guided conversation with a neutral, unagendered, I guess, is in some ways, but maybe socially neutral is perhaps the component I think is important. Third party in the room, whereas I guess in the dorm room where they're having the conversation, all the social dynamics are at play, all of the hierarchy, all of the confident speakers, people having a willingness to fight for their point, etc. Yeah.
It might even. I'm seeing Stephen Whitaker's comment. Regarding family and street epistemology, a lot of us think that it's better not to try to do SE with your close intimates. In case of a rapport loss, there's a cost. So if you want to have SE conversations, grab one of your friends that's good at SE, because if your friend and your family member have a falling, who cares? They'll be fine.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have resonated with SE specifically because they have difficult conversations that they need to have. So you know, and I think that one of the things that they look for in SE is a set of tools that might help them navigate those difficult conversations. And I think there are things within the tool set of SE that would help people do that. Not least of all, working very hard on just listening. And working hard on allowing the other person to asking questions and not directly contradicting or forcing in alternative facts, not trying to win the game, for example. I often talk about this as again, this is in contradiction to the idea Spectrum SE being a game is that, you know, a conversation, it shouldn't be, I don't think, a game. It shouldn't be a zero-sum game for sure. It's a game, you know, a meaningful conversation with another person who is honestly engaged in the subject matter should be a win-win for both parties, regardless of the outcome. Like you've had a chance to explore your view with somebody who's honestly exploring the view as well. That doesn't have to be a winner or loser situation. If you're wrong, you should be winning on the base. Or you discover that a view you're holding, I should say, is not one that you at the end of the conversation continue to hold. That's beneficial for you. And if you've managed to convince somebody you care about, and that you know that they are in that position where they're holding a potentially incorrect position, and help them understand why that is, then that's beneficial for you as well, because now you've done some service and helped another human being, and that's a good feeling, I think. So yes, a lot of this is edging around. So I think one of the questions is that sort of sits at the heart of the community is this question about what is SE? What is it used for? What does it mean to learn it? How do we define it? What isn't it? I think these things have been around for ever since I've been part of the community for the last, say, two and a bit years, maybe, or 2 years. I've been increasingly curious as to, okay, how do I really understand whether I've understood what SE is? You know, if I want to help promote it, if I want to help teach it, if I want to learn it, be better at saying I know what this is, if I want to defend it against its critics, I need to know what this thing is. And one thing that I've noticed over the last few years, as I said at the beginning, is like this is a challenge within the community itself. I think the concept of street epistemology has become quite a broad concept. So before we go into my solution for this, or my proposal for this, how do you guys reflect on that? And I guess what problems do you see coming from that? And what's your reflections on the definition and identity of SE?
Yeah, this was a problem that we're now trying to solve with the SE course, and we've been working on this for 2 years, and we can look at the changes in the document for Module 1 and how it's changed a lot with the definition specifically. And we're always refining it and testing it, and I think we've ended up with a place where it's pretty close.
So for anybody who's not familiar, this is the Street Epistemology course, which is going to be available to everybody for free, that you can take to understand and sort of move through and help have a guided learning system for actually getting to be able to fully understand what street epistemology is. And Module 1 specifically is the module for explaining, well, I think it's literally called, isn't it, what is SE? What is street epistemology? And giving that definition. I think if anything, though, you could say that the fact that this has been a problem and that it's now been an effort of 2 years to try to build a course to help clarify and explain and present it, and that Module 1 specifically is still causing challenges, I think if anything just sort of highlights the difficulties in that endeavor, right? It's clearly not been an easy thing to define and explain what SE is.
Yeah. We're referring to something and people can't see it. Could you copy from Module 1 what the current definition is? Is it short?
I don't know if you have
Reid
that one, Reid?
I'm asking Reid because he has access to that document. And if not, that's okay, because the comment I want to make is the community is defining street epistemology through conversations like we're having right now, and through lots and lots of conversations online, lots of ways. And I think it's entirely possible that the community might define SE changingly over time in a way that would make what I'm doing no longer that modern SE. And then I would have a choice. Should I relabel what I'm doing and say, this is my version, asterisk, whatever, street epistemology, subset Dali, whatever, or should I modify my action to fit within their definition? And either one of those is a very useful challenge. So I want to encourage that kind of thing. And I recognize that it's not up to a small number of people's control to define SE. It's entirely within Peter's control to define what he meant when he coined the term. It's entirely within Street Epistemology International's remit to specify what that organization thinks it means. Totally, completely. And none of those are a final reference. And people are going to agree and disagree as to whether something qualifies within this, and because they have varying Venn diagram. Sure, great. And sorry if it's not solid enough, it's too nuanced.
No, so just for anybody not familiar with, so Street Epistemology International is the non-profit organization designed to help promote and champion street epistemology and its use and adoption. Is that a fair assessment, Reid?
Yeah.
That I think when I started talking to yourself, Reid, and to Anthony about this subject, really, there were a few things that I thought were really interesting about the conversation. One is that there was a genuine reluctance to strongly define or dictate to a certain extent what SE is. Because there was a sense of that leading to dogmatic views, and that Anthony didn't, for example, I mean, Anthony, I think, is probably unarguably the most visible champion of SE and sort of ambassador for SE. And I think he doesn't want his opinion even to be necessarily the definitive answer to what SE is. And I think he sees that because he might be wrong. Maybe he doesn't want to ruin the opportunity for SE to be better because of his particular view on it. He wants it to be a sort of a marketplace of ideas that kind of end up in a good place as a result of exactly what we're talking about with Spectrum SE, right? A sort of collective decision making, which I thought was very good. I sort of very support, I guess, the idea behind that. But I did point out at the time, and I still feel like in some ways that represents a sort of a strange contradiction, that Street Epistemology International as an organization is championing a concept that isn't strongly defined, and that kind of must be kind of challenging when you're having conversations about it. So, Reid, I know you're on the board of Street Epistemology International. I hope that's not. I think that's fairly well understood. And so from your perspective, how do you feel about that challenge? And is that in part what led to the creation of the course?
Yeah, that is largely what the reason why we're doing the course, to get this definition settled in some form that the community understands and agrees upon. We got a lot of submissions from the community, and we're getting feedback from the community once our modules are done. And this is all, something we want to keep open to revision even once we do finalize it, still getting criticism from anybody. So, yeah, we're just trying to get it all on board with everybody.
Yeah, that's cool. So I think one of the other things I would like to recount is this idea where we talked about even the name Street Epistemology and its relationship with its heritage in a manual for creating atheists, and the challenges that brings, because it certainly contextualizes a certain perspective that perhaps was more prevalent in Street Epistemology historically than maybe is today. And whether or not that was something that was holding Street Epistemology back from a broader adoption, and also the name Street Epistemology seems like an odd contradiction. It's epistemology is not a term people use in everyday language, and it is by sort of its nature an academic term, and the sort of slightly strange collaboration it has now with the term street, which is supposedly some sort of grassroots. The idea of street is a sort of a grassroots sort of common sort of everyday person accessible sort of use of something. And so it's in some ways it's suggesting non-academic sphere of usage, and then using this very academic term along with it. So even without the history potentially and the sort of perspectives people might have about Street Epistemology from its originating document, A Manual for Creating Atheists, the word Street Epistemology carries with it some challenges, perhaps. And whilst I don't necessarily disagree with it as a name, I don't think it necessarily needs to change. I think what was interesting was that in my early conversations, I think Reid, you and I were there, and I think Anthony was there, and I sort of suggested, have you guys ever thought about renaming this thing? And it was really gratifying to see how open you guys were to exploring that. What would be a better name is the question. Like how and what is the cost of adopting a new name and going through this experience? I recount that story not because I'm trying to, I guess, propose that we rename Street Epistemology, but more to show something that I think is not necessarily as obvious to a lot of people, especially its critics, which is how willing Street Epistemology is to change, like how willing the community is to change and to listen to criticisms and to try to improve. And I think that's an important characteristic of the community, as much as Street Epistemology International. Cool. So, this, I guess this leads then to this idea of the definition of Street Epistemology, what it is, what it isn't, and having it be a broad church, if you pardon the expression, in terms of people being able to bring different perspectives and views to the table. And I think one of the things that I've noticed, especially in recent days, recent as in, I guess, the last 6 months or so, 8 to 6 months, is that the same challenge, the same journey that I went down trying to understand what Street Epistemology is and find confidence in my decision to support it in a sort of foundational idea about what it is, coming into conflict with people claiming Street Epistemology was X, and I didn't agree necessarily with X. I didn't necessarily feel comfortable supporting X, whatever that is. And that made me feel uncertain because I couldn't say that they were wrong in saying that Street Epistemology was X, right? So one example of this might be, the sort of classic criticism of Street Epistemology is that Street Epistemology is a tool for promoting atheism. And that's clearly has some really genuine justification in its foundation in a manual for creating atheists. And I think I can understand why people would feel that that's what Street Epistemology still is. And any attempts to say anything other than that are just disingenuous and attempts to just hide the truth of its secret, nefarious atheist agenda, which I can understand. I can understand why people think that. But there are people, I'm sure, within the community that think it is that are here because they think it's that they actually are here because they want to use it as a tool specifically for converting people to the atheist mindset. Or fans. Indeed, say again, sorry, Dali?
Pine Creek fans, we'll call them.
Pine Creek fans.
Pine Creek, who doesn't call what he does SE, but it's just so overlapping. But really, it's Pine Creek's counter apologetics in an SE style. So it's a good example.
I've been watching a few of his videos recently, and I'm worryingly becoming a fan. I don't like that. I need to work against it.
Pine Creek is your guilty pleasure.
He is becoming increasingly my guilty pleasure. Yes, but yes, I will say, I think there is that component within the community. There's also a sort of component where people feel like it's a set of tools for changing people's minds explicitly. And I think that can be a sort of a way of thinking about it, but I think it could also be quite a problematic view of what Street Epistemology is. I've heard people talk about it as if it's a tool for helping you understand what other people think, and that's its primary objective. I've heard it be described as a tool for persuading people or encouraging people to think something differently. And I think some of these things are not just different perspectives, but worryingly contradictory perspectives. And it's sorry, one more to say again, Dali.
No conflict as long as you take the just out of it.
Okay.
I think I am asking you I'm trying to persuade you toward critical thinking and reflection. I am definitely attempting that you might change your mind on the topic, but I'm kind of not trying to push for a particular direction of that change. And I am genuinely interested in understanding your position, especially for the Chapter 7 ideologues, because that's the only payoff I'm going to get is understanding them.
Chapter 7, sorry?
Chapter 7 of Impossible Conversations refers to people that are fixed ideologues. They are doxastically closed. And what you're doing is not going to change their mind. It's still worthwhile having the conversation, because just learning their perspective, learning the language that they use, the way they think, is useful when you're having a similar conversation later with somebody who holds a similar position but is not closed on it.
Right. Interesting.
And it's good for skin thickening.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Reid, I know we've talked about these different perspectives on what SE is in previous videos. I forget which one, but I know we've talked about it a lot. And has your view on like these different perspectives changed at all in the recent months, and or do you still hold that they're all vaguely valid in some way?
Yeah, we have in Module 2, the main goals are understanding, reflection, and persuasion. These are the main three goals, and I think reflection is always the top priority. If you're moving persuasion as a higher priority than reflection, then that might be an issue. And reflection, it's hard to know what that means as well. And if the definition of persuasion is changing someone's mind without coercion, that usually means shifting their level of confidence about the claim. That's usually what we mean by persuasion. But that is less of a priority for me. I want people to have rigorous ways of evaluating claims, regardless of where they start. And as long as they now understand how they're doing that better, I don't care if they move on that level of confidence for the claim itself. If they reflect on the quality of their reasons in relationship to that level of confidence, and that causes a shift, that may be an interesting result, but I more care about their quality of their ability to justify their beliefs. And I want them to have a better way of doing that if they don't have a good way at this point.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like persuasion is such a dangerous, and again, this is well trodden ground for me, and I know we've spoken about it before, but I feel like persuasion is such a dangerous component to add to a list of objectives for street epistemology. That's the one that I think we're accused of having as an agenda. Persuasion suggests that as the street epistemologist, the outcome, the thing that they should believe, and that you want them to believe that. But I think that might be an uncharitable definition, because you could be meaning, by saying persuasion, you could mean, I want to persuade you to have better reasons, or I want to persuade you to reflect on this more and come to whatever conclusions you may do. That could be what you mean by persuasion.
Yeah.
But if persuasion's in there to mean anything else, I would be really concerned. And I actually don't kind of think we need, if somebody's already reflecting, and I would suggest that reflecting is just a kind of introspection. It's kind of taking a moment to honestly think about, taking advantage of being doxastically open, right? Reflection is what is possible if you're doxastically open. I think encouraging somebody to do that reflection is going to lead to whatever conclusions it may lead to, without the need for the street epistemologist to actively work towards persuading somebody. That would be, yeah.
If we keep the persuasion to the reflection, the critical thinking, and doxastic openness, now persuasion isn't getting in the way of those goals, it's serving those goals.
Yeah, but I would argue, does it need to be a goal at all? Like, to what extent do you think persuasion is a goal when you're doing street epistemology? To what extent are you actively working on persuasion, do you think?
100% of all the words that I use are intended to persuade people to some sort of change in their behavior, even if it's only to like the topic I'm talking about. So
I see. Yeah.
All of my persuasion is there. Now the question is, what am I persuading toward? And now my goals can be very clear: critical thinking, reflection, doxastic openness. I'll just pick those terms.
If I could just challenge that for 1 second, though.
Yes.
I think it's totally valid to consider all speech and all dialogue to be a form of persuasion.
Mhm.
We're saying things because we want to make a change happen in the mind of the person we're speaking to, even if that change is that they now understand what we think.
Yeah.
So
Or
there is a
you'll pass me the salt. Could be.
exactly. So I don't disagree that all uttered speech or language is persuasion in some form. You could make that case, but we wouldn't describe necessarily all speech as persuasion in the sense that we use the term persuasion, I think, to call out specific cases where it has your intention to change what the person thinks has elevated above, let's just say, a baseline norm for conversations. So I really want you to buy this car, and therefore I'm trying to get you to buy the car, is what we would call out as persuasion against a baseline of me just talking enthusiastically about a car without that intent. So I would say I totally agree, all language is persuasion of sorts, or all language is affecting to cause change in the minds of the people we're speaking to. I think we would specifically describe something as persuasion when it elevated above a specific baseline. So I think if we frame it in that way, is it reasonable to then continue to have persuasion as a component of street epistemology's goals?
For the critical thinking, doxastic openness, encouragement to reflection, I say yes, because those are the stated goals above persuasion.
And do you think so? I think what that might be framed as is encouraging you to see certain tools as useful for internal self-reflection.
Yes.
And I think that is definitely, you could say that's persuasion again. You could say I'm persuading you to notice these things, but I'm wondering if we would necessarily need to describe those things as persuasion, or call them out as persuasion, especially when the concept of persuasion is such a loaded concept. And that, say, if somebody was reading the course material and they remembered that one of the things you're allowed to do under SE is persuade people, I think that gives people too open a license to maybe misunderstand and perhaps do some things that we would probably not describe as very SE-like in their conversation. So again, I guess the question isn't really how could we make, is there any persuasion, or I guess what is the usefulness of calling out persuasion specifically as a potential goal for SE? And I know, Reid, you and I have disagreed about this a little bit in the past, I think, in terms of what might be a primary and a secondary goal, for example. I don't know.
It's just because a lot of people who got into SE got into it for activist reasons, for the purpose of persuading certain people to reduce their confidence in a certain set of beliefs, namely religious and supernatural ones. And we found out SE is effective at that. But now over the time, we've found it's more effective for a lot of things, especially inspiring reflection about anything. And we may be wrong about a lot of things, different from supernatural and religious claims. So we don't want to go into it knowing we know the truth, potentially.
Right.
We want to be more open for maybe political and social issues. And if your goal is to persuade someone out of some political opinion or social issue opinion, maybe that would move us away from something we actually don't want to move away from. We want to actually adopt their opinion potentially. And if our goal is to persuade, then that may inhibit that.
I don't think there's any position that I couldn't find I was wrong. There are positions I would be more surprised to find I was wrong on, for sure. And I would be requiring of stronger and more spectacular evidence to support a claim that I was wrong on. But I don't think there's any position that I would say, even religious questions. I'm not a hard atheist, for example. I could not say for sure that I knew there was no God. And I think that anybody that can is making just as big a mistake as anybody else in that space. And I would say that as a result, I think it's reasonable to approach all conversations openly, or try to approach them with the opportunity to say, okay, what is it that you think, and okay, what are your reasons? And accept the possibility that understanding that other person's reasons might be persuasive to you, and if they're not, then you use your own intuition tools to help them notice why maybe those conclusions aren't as sound as they thought they were. But I think, I think the idea of using it for activism, it presupposes that you have the right answer, and I think that's maybe not ideal.
Yes. Right. So we call it, then we may call it decanvassing.
Decanvassing, sorry? Did you say?
Canvassing is
deep canvassing.
Very similar to SE with two modifications. One, they bring the claim, they choose the topic, the interviewer chooses the topic, and two, they use specific emotive stories in order to persuade a position toward their topic.
Right.
It's very much like Greg Fokel's the Columbo tactic, whatever he calls his thing, where he does something very much like SE, and then when they get to an aporia, he stuffs Jesus in.
Right. Yes, I've heard the term Jesus smuggling quite a bit. I quite like that as a concept. Here's where I think like the difference might lie, right? Like if I was using street epistemology as a vegan, for example, trying to promote veganism within the community.
Shout out to the vegan part of the SE community. Hello, everybody. I would consider my conversation having been unsuccessful if the person I was speaking to was not more open to the ideas of veganism at the end of the conversation than they were at the beginning. And I think that's a worrying concept. That's a worrying set of criteria to place on an SE conversation, because I think the beauty of SE is that it really doesn't, we should actively work against having that goal in mind. The other thing I've said recently, and I stand by it, is that I'm an atheist. I don't believe as an atheist that any of the world's religions or the existence of any other gods are true and real. But that's not to say that I couldn't have my mind changed on that position. But if I was to talk to somebody and I would say that they had highly superficial reasons for and very poor epistemological reasons and had never really reflected on the reason why they're an atheist, I would genuinely feel better about convincing them, making them less confident in my position by encouraging them to reflect on the reasons why they have that position. I would also be happy to make a theist who has got strong epistemological reasons, more confident if that was the case. Like it doesn't matter to me. I'd rather have a thinking theist than an unthinking atheist. That would be a better outcome. Would be a thinking theist than an unthinking atheist, for sure. I equally would love a conversation speaking to somebody who thought the Earth was a globe, who left with slightly less confidence that was true. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, if you don't have good reasons for believing the Earth is a globe, then you don't have good reasons, and it's important and useful to recognize that fact, and then perhaps reflect on what might be good reasons, and depending on how important this issue is to you, because I think that is a component of a lot of people's belief systems. Is sometimes they just don't feel emotively engaged in the topic. It's sufficient to want to challenge it or to do some, do your own research. But the reality is that I think a lot of people would be benefited by just this honest reflection process, regardless of what the actual outcome of that is. I think it's about encouraging critical thinking. It's encouraging engagement with the tools, and that reflection, I think. So
going back to the vegan example, I would very much prefer a vegan SEer to attempt to persuade me. If they wanted to persuade me to become a vegan, I would rather them be doing it with an SE style conversation rather than the usual form of vegan activism I see online with, especially the motive stuff happening. It appeals to emotion, appeals to a lot of stuff that's more rhetoric based. And if they came to me and said, I really care about veganism, I like having conversations with people about it, and I hope potentially at the end I would inspire you to potentially become a vegan. That is part of my goals, but I also want to use SE about this claim with you to help you critically think about your eating habits. Do they align with your own values, or are you okay with it? It's hard to say if that's a bad thing to do. I would suspect someone who's not a vegan. I don't know. Would someone who's not a vegan do a better job at SEing someone? I don't know.
I think the ideal would be that you would be, as a non-vegan, you would be as effective in that space using street epistemology as a vegan would be. Like one of the, I think I was recently asked that in my video with Sushi, where he asked me, I think, like he invited me to think about the difference between the way a theist street epistemologist would ask questions and an atheist street epistemologist would ask questions. And in my view, like I would see that if they were both equally good at street epistemology, the outcome would be identical, like the effect would be identical. And I think that's a really important characteristic. So the idea of a vegan street epistemologist seems at odds with really the idea of being a street epistemologist at all, right? Like you may. Sorry, Dali, go ahead.
No, I just said, I mean, everybody's got something.
Of course, yeah.
Can I be a queer street epistemologist? And well, the answer is some of the time that gets in the way. Just flat out does.
Sure.
I think there can be SEers who specialize in certain topics.
Yep.
That is,
sure.
And like the classical one is the religious topics. That's just where it came from. But we could have SEers who specialize in veganism, specialize in LGBT issues, specialize in communism. I don't know.
Sure.
Or capitalism.
I agree with that completely. And I think that you could say, Dali, if you were to say I'm a queer street epistemologist and I'm bringing that to the table, you could say that to the extent where that bias was affecting the way you were asking those questions, you would say you were failing to do, I would say, good SE. Okay. That doesn't mean it wasn't a good conversation or it wasn't worthwhile. Or it's not a value judgment on the virtue of the position you're holding.
Sure.
It would just be a reflection on the quality of the street epistemology, in my opinion.
Being an atheist street epistemologist leaves me with a bit of a handicap with some claimants who will insist on knowing my position before the end of the conversation, at which point, after they've asked the second or maybe the third time, depending on how rapport goes, I'm going to disclose my position. Same thing with being queer. If somebody's got a high purity standard going on in there, I have broken rapport because of being honest about my position. And I think I'm willing to take those losses. I'm going to take the L on those small fraction of people who are not willing to wait till the end.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And again, like I think we can talk about what the ideal is and recognize that no actual conversation will ever survive like sticking to that ideal, right? So I think that's a really important point that I want to make sure I'm clear about, because I think not being clear about this sounds like I'm gatekeeping what is and isn't SE in a way, or like I'm suggesting that, you know, the moment we transgress a certain line, we can no longer call it a street epistemology. That's not at all what I would be suggesting. It's more a case of we could say that it would have been a better conversation had your bias necessarily or your position on a particular view not expressed itself in some way. And I think we already do this, right? I mean, one of my favorite examples of this is how much we laugh at poor Mark Solomon occasionally when he's such a nice guy who's so even-handed all the time. Will occasionally show his hand out of frustration, and it's just charming because it's like, wow, it's just
he's so honest. Wonderful. You just can't help but being transparent.
It's brilliant. He's lovely. I love Mark. But yeah, he will, you know, occasionally ask a very agendaed, lazy, cheap shot question, and it's just so charming coming from him, especially. But it's funny because he recognizes I shouldn't have done that. Yeah, like it's. So I think it's just having this hard standard, I think, is really useful, because I think we could recognize the virtue of, well, I'd hope we might recognize the virtue of having a hard standard, basically, and then saying, you know, that ideally all conversations would be equally neutral. In a perfect world, a vegan SEer would be just effective as a meat-eating SEer in challenging a person about their views on and their reasons why they are or are not a vegan. I think they would, in an ideal world, we would be able to encourage the meaningful reflection, not because we hold a different view, but because the person's views themselves were not epistemologically as well thought through, and it's that we're working on. It's not the actual outcome. That's kind of my view on it. I think as these things go.
I'm asking you to weigh something so you learn how to use the scale. Not that I care how much the thing weighs.
Perfect. Love it. Yeah.
It's just because SE is so effective at persuasion, activists will eventually find it, and they have their goals. And if we explicitly say don't use it for persuasion, they're going to use it anyway. Maybe.
Well, they can use it anyway. Like for example, the one of the interesting things, and this is my own reflection on this space, which is, as we just discussed, irrelevant. But I'm not a vegan, but I definitely would consider that inconsistent with my general worldview and moral intuitions. Like I strongly know that I'm sufficiently aware of the conditions in which meat is processed, managed, and all that horrible stuff, that were I to be more emotionally connected to the truth of that, even though I know it, I'm not really emotionally connected to the truth of it, that I probably would change my mind about what I would eat. But I'm continuing to eat meat anyway. So my view would be that a street epistemologist, vegan or otherwise, could quite easily identify these contradictions in my worldviews and point out to me that I'm not being entirely consistent, which they would be correct to do. But the question really is, if it's a tool for persuasion, if you say, okay, well, the vegans can use it for persuasion, well, could somebody use it to persuade you of something that is not true?
Yes.
I mean, if it is a tool for persuasion, that is on the table, right? So we would say that it would be veganism, SE veganism, because they're using the tools of SE to explore the reasons why you do not want to be a vegan, for example. And so they're looking at the epistemology, they're looking at the reasons why you hold the position you do, and they're trying to understand the rationality of those positions. But if they have the outcome defined, like they say, okay, our ultimate goal is to make you a vegan, right? And they're using persuasion to get you there. Now, all of a sudden, they're not so much caring about your particular reasons. They just want to get you to the outcome. They want to get you to the conclusion. Fine. And that's the nature of that persuasion component to me.
Yeah, but that is not sincere or honest. You want to evaluate the whole case, all of the reasons, especially the highest quality reasons on both sides.
Sure.
And if you ignore a certain set of reasons for the purpose of persuasion, then you're risking that person actually finding out about those reasons and then losing that gain in persuasion.
Yeah. And you can fix that problem entirely by upfront saying, I'm intentionally trying to persuade you toward a particular position. I would like to attempt to persuade you to think differently about X. And now I'm not doing SE anymore. I'm not even calling it SE, but I'm using all my SE toolbox in there, and I'm being transparent and honest.
The Pine Creek Gambit, yes, I like that one. It's a good gambit.
And a lot of people about a lot of things, and that it's usually pretty well received. And it's not the first conversation. That's important. The rapport is built, and then I can talk to a theist and say, I'd like to try to talk you out of being annoyed at homosexuals.
Here's one way to frame the characteristic that I think I'm trying to aspire to here, right? I think it was I've forgotten the Joshua. I think it was it Joshua? He was an ex-Mormon gentleman who I spoke to, and he was talking to me about how he had left the Mormon church and was lamenting the amount of time, energy, and effort he'd spent on the streets evangelizing for his particular faith position. Mm-hmm. And I've heard this from a few people, not least of all Mormons, but certainly a range of other religions, where people have held a strong view, have come to realize that have actively worked in the world to try to convert people to that view, have campaigned and passionately advocated for it, and had come to then realize that they no longer hold that view, and that are now feeling remorseful as a result of the maybe potential harm that they were partly complicit in doing to the world by evangelizing for their view that they now no longer believe to be true. And I can't imagine how that must feel. That must feel extremely unpleasant. And now many of these people have come to street epistemology to find a better path, to try to advocate for the other side in some ways. And I think one of the things that's interesting about it is that if you are truly a neutral street epistemologist and you really are approaching each conversation without bias, I don't think there'll ever be a time, no matter what your views may be in the future, that you would regret having an honest SE conversation. Like, because you're not putting your agenda, your bias into that position. Ideally, if you're doing, like, let's call it pure SE for the sake of a horrible label that we shouldn't use, but let's say if you're doing hardcore pure SE, there's no way that later on you'd regret doing that, because you're not pushing your agenda. You're encouraging somebody to honestly and openly reflect. Like, you're never going to look back and think, oh man, I really wish I'd never got that person to change their view or like convince them. You're emancipated from the burden of being right. You're no longer giving a hostage to fortune, that your views now are going to be the ones that you still think are true and real, in 5-10 years time. And I think that's a really useful characteristic, that SE is a thing that you can be doing now. And after you've changed your views, you can still do SE, and that in theory, your SE wouldn't change. Yeah,
that part I completely agree. We have theists doing SE, we have atheists, we have vegans, we have mediators, and it's all, that all works. I'm thinking of examples of SE conversations I regret, and maybe I can allow that in those SE conversations, the reason I regret them is because I failed to follow the best practices. And then, okay, great, no argument. I wonder if you have a list of those best practices. Transition to the title.
Well, yeah. Well, but before I do that, I was just going to say, like, I think the things that, if ever I reflect on the conversation and I regret it, I realize that the reason I regret it is because I stepped too much into the conversation.
Yeah,
like my opinions became too much irrelevant to the nature of the discourse. Like, I completely feel like that's why I regret an SE conversation the most. It's not because I feel like it went well or badly. It's that I ended up falling into the bad habit of injecting truths, delivering messages, all of these good, useful tools that we have that Boghossian has set out for us, right? Like, these are good and useful tools, and I think delivering messages and injecting truths, and I think those mental models are really good things to think about when you're having these kinds of conversations, and good indicators that it's gone awry. Before we transition, any further thoughts on any of that, Reid? Sorry, this is a rambly conversation, but I think we don't have to call it a rambly conversation. We could just say it's a conversation that involves me. It's sufficient, I think.
No, I think we explored that a lot. That's good.
Okay, cool. So let me just recapture then a little bit of the background for this very briefly. Then the part of, I think, the frustration that some people within the community feel, and I don't think I'm alone in this. I definitely know that there are other people in the community that feel this frustration, is this lack of definition is causing people some genuine anxiety, I think, and uncertainty about what to do. And I understand that the course is, in a very meaningful way, an attempt to address that challenge, but it's a very big endeavor, and it's clearly not a quick thing to throw out the door. And I think whilst we're waiting for the course, I definitely think there's an increase in sort of internal uncertainty about what street epistemology is, and how we can build tools to make it better. So one of the things that I started to do was write down sort of my thoughts on what my version of SE is, what my definition of SE is. And I think a lot of people have done the same work. Actually, they've all come up with their own documents, and they've all shared their different definitions with each other. I've definitely shared mine with many people, and talked about those definitions, pros and cons, and sort of battered it around. And this version of what I'm going to show you guys, and I know you've seen already, is basically my attempt to say, well, why does it need to be? What if we gave this version of SE a name? And in doing so, we could refer to it. And I think that's quite an interesting concept. And I think that within the concept of SE being a broad church and people having lots of conflicting ideas, I think if we could create a version of it that has a name, that has an identity that you could refer to, you could say that this is or isn't this particular version. And I think that we can use this as a useful tool to help having conversations about what SE might be for other people. So let me share this document with you. Again, I know you guys have seen this, but we'll walk through it for the sake of the stream, and definitely would love to hear your thoughts on it. Let me see if I can share the right screen here. But all right, so So this is called. So I've called this current. This is currently everything here is work in progress. This is hugely work in progress, right? So we've got this fancy ass, threatening, terrifying weapon of death and murder, which of course is the right visual metaphor for a friendly conversational technique. But there are 6 stars underneath the arrow, and hopefully all of that all makes sense in a moment. So Archer is the acronym that I'm using. And the idea of this is that it's a standardized framework for inspiring reflection. I deliberately didn't want to say this is SE, because this isn't SE. SE is a bigger thing. This is something that sits underneath SE. But this is, I think, me attempting to define more strongly an idea of what street epistemology, a version of street epistemology can be. And so let's skip through this stuff. Okay. I guess I'll just read it out. Would that be just, it's not a very long document, but I guess it's probably to give it the right context. So since its inception in 2013, street epistemology has grown and evolved, resulting in various ideas about its objectives, methods, and approaches. Not all of these ideas are mutually compatible, making it hard to say anything definitive about street epistemology without the risk of contradicting an alternative view. I'm terrible at reading things out, by the way, so that's just going to happen.
We can share that if you like. We can all do it.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, What are your thoughts on that initial assessment? I mean, does that seem like a fair assessment?
I get the goal. That's the thesis of your point, is to say that there's evolution and it's difficult to define.
Yeah, just the mutual compatibility is still in question for me. But yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. I hear that. I think it's true. I think we could talk about that, but I definitely feel like I could justify that, which isn't an argument, I understand, but yeah. So let's just press on. So to continue to counter the ambiguity around street epistemology as a whole, this document proposes this creation of a subset of street epistemology with a strict definition and set of principles. As a subset of street epistemology, the following things could reasonably be asserted. This is could. Those who adopt this standard can be said to be doing street epistemology. Not all those doing street epistemology are adopting or need to adopt this standard. In providing a strict, objective, and defined set of principles, it becomes possible to evaluate the interactions against the Archer standard, even interactions that did not set out to follow the standard. So I think that's the kind of get out of jail free for me. That's the kind of escape hatch for me, being told, okay, you're gatekeeping. This isn't SE for me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be SE for everybody. Like, if you don't want to adopt this approach, then don't. That's cool. Like, totally, I'm on board with that. But it also means that we could still describe other people's interactions as they might relate to the Archer standard, mm-hmm. even if they didn't set out to achieve that standard. And I think that's a useful.
I might have a conversation that is 80% Archer compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Or we could still evaluate the conversation in relationship to the criteria of an Archer conversation and say, hey, this wasn't even an SE conversation, but this is just two people talking. Like, how well did they achieve the Archer standard, for example? Like, you could still do that, sure. And it wouldn't even have to be an SE conversation. Yeah.
A lot of conversations I have end up qualifying as an SE conversation in terms of goals and tone and the various kinds of tests that you might make. Without ever having set out to do that. It's just part of my communication toolbox these days.
Yeah.
I guess my only issue so far is this implies the larger part of SE could potentially be unethical or contradictory.
It implies the larger part of SE could be unethical or contradictory. It certainly says there are multiple ideas that I don't think are mutually compatible. I think there are some people that might hold an extreme view of what SE is that isn't. I've heard some very atypical views. You know, there are extremes in any organization, right? So there are some people that would say SE is X, right? And I would just absolutely say that anybody doing X is not doing SE, in my view. Mm-hmm. The challenge that I would have is, at the moment, because there is no stronger definition, I can't then say to that person, hey, no, look, this is where it says what SE is, so therefore it's not what you think it is, and therefore you're wrong. Mm-hmm. So I don't think by trying to propose this in this way, I'm trying to suggest that SE inherently is all wrong. I'm just saying, let's just create a little garden here and just say that this is very specifically what we're doing.
Yeah. And yeah, this is probably unfair for most people watching because I have intimate knowledge of the course so far, and so far it seems very compatible, except for the potential persuasion part, but we can get to that.
Yeah, and again, this is one of the things that's probably very true about this. Is I've gone through this exercise in the past. I found that these definitions do not massively conflict with many people's views on what SE is. This isn't sort of entirely brand new stuff. This is definitely just a sort of summarizing, I guess, of what I think of as most people's view of SE.
Yeah, I want to put a bookmark for later on areas where things outside of your definition that are within SE are conflicting. I want to address that, but I don't want to interrupt your process to do that.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Bookmark placed. Although I trust you to remember that bookmark because I'm definitely not.
It's my bookmark.
Cool. So one of the things that I really like about this standardizing and this sort of strict SE, I call it an opinionated framework. It is an opinionated framework. And I think one of the things that's good about having an opinionated framework is that you can measure things inside of it. It is a structure that you can evaluate things in relationship. And because of evaluation, then there's a process of improving. So you can start to say, hey, this tool makes this particular component of this method better, so we should use this tool. It's a framework for evaluating tools. And so an evaluation can be made by understanding how well an interaction focused on the Archer objective and how well it adhered to each of the 6 Archer principles. Given the evaluation framework, improvements can be encouraged and progress both measured and understood. So that's a hugely important characteristic for teaching people SE. Like I'm thinking about the SE practice sessions, for example. Like now we've got a framework for when somebody says, okay, I had this interaction. We've now got like this framework where we can go through each of the principles and say, okay, how well did you stick to those principles? Were there good and bad points? And also, how well did you stick to the objective? Now, again, they could totally claim that I'm not attempting to stick to the Archer principles in that conversation. I'm not saying this is SE, but by having these principles and this objective clearly defined, it does allow for that feedback to be given in a very constructive way, and people could also get better. Like normally, one of your principles is like kind of weak, but you did a much better job of it this week. Like it got a lot better. I noticed that improvement. Like that's really good feedback to give to somebody. Or, hey, you did really well on these like 3 things. Like keep it up. That's really good. I think that kind of feedback is really useful, and having a framework to give that is useful.
Second, I have a graphic in my head that I'd love to talk to you later. Maybe it's after about how to score an Archer thing on a target with 6 points. A bit later.
I'm just considering that just a mean statement for somebody with aphantasia.
I'm sorry. I'm just saying I have a thing in my head, and you don't need to have it in your head.
Oh yeah, you can't picture things. That's right.
That's right. Yeah. It is hoped that this framework establishes Archer as something that can be more easily learned, taught, and for which techniques can be developed. Okay, so that's basically the high-level sort of, I guess, throat clearing for what this is and isn't, I guess, as a document, why I'm writing it. Shall I press on? I assume we're okay with that. Okay, perfect. Okay, Archer, an overview. Archer, pronounced Archer. So somebody accused me of gatekeeping, even to the extent where I'm now telling people how to express this word. But I swear to God, I'm in IT. In IT, they come up with new, crazily named, random, like linguistically impossible names all the time and give no guidance as to how anybody should pronounce it. And this is technically an acronym, and I don't want anybody having to say, "Hey, I do ARCHER." Like it's perfectly like a useful thing, I think. Hopefully, for people to just call it Archer, and that's fine, and be clear about that. So I've said it's called Archer, and it stands for agnostic, respectful, charitable, honest epistemology and reflection. So those are the key principles that I am using to define the concept of this idea, of this standard.
Epistemological and reflection and reflective, to put it in the same terms as the prior 4.
Yes, there's been some thoughts on this. Ragnar from the SE Discord community has been extremely helpful talking through some of this stuff, and has pointed out that these these are talking about how we have the conversation, and these two are talking about the goals of the conversation. And so there's a slight sort of discontinuity with the linguistics there. He's also proposed an alternative acronym, which I'll address at the end, but we can certainly explore it because I think that's one of the questions people have had. But we'll press on for the moment. So Archer represents an opinionated objective and set of principles. Only by adopting the objective and adhering to the principles are the requirements of the Archer standard met. So it's not an opt-in, you have to do it all. Like that's a key component. Like you can't just be having a respectful conversation and calling that SE, right? It has to have all of these components for it to be an Archer conversation. And it is opinionated. That doesn't mean that it's right. It just means that this is an opinionated framework. And if you have a different opinion, that's great. Do your own thing. But that wouldn't be Archer, in my view. Okay, I'll just list this one. Any methods that achieve the objective whilst maintaining the principles is valid. So this is method agnostic, which is an important characteristic that I think has been lost in a lot of the SE conversations. A lot of people within the SE community see Street Epistemology as an interview style interaction with people because that's the most visual representation of its effect in the world. And I think that that's an unnecessary, that's useful for creating video content, but it's not necessary as a requirement for having an SE conversation or interaction. I remember talking to Anthony about this. If anybody's seen my interview with Anthony, we talked about my thought experiment where we said if there was a form of meditation that would encourage somebody to honestly and critically reflect on the reasons they believe what they believe, that could be demonstrated to be more effective at doing that than having a conversation, would Street Epistemology be promoting conversation or the meditation method? And he said the meditation method because it's all about what we're trying to achieve. And I agree with that. I think that's the right answer. But there are a lot of people in the community that think differently, that think it has to be a conversation. So throughout this document, references to a conversation partner can be seen as referring to the subject in which we wish to inspire reflection regardless of the method. So it's, method agnostic. So the objective. So this is the objective. Archer seeks to respectfully and honestly encourage others to critically reflect on why they think something is true. That's it. So how do you guys feel about that as a objective for an SE conversation or a definition of one?
It fails to reference the agnostic part.
Yep.
And I also want to emphasize there's a relation. We want to reflect on the quality of the relationship between their level of confidence that something is true and the reasons that they give for thinking that it's true.
It's like Michael Meaders just stepped into the room.
But critically could mean that potentially.
That's very much the service that critically is doing. So one of the criteria that I had for this is that I wanted to make it short and simple, and I wanted to make it easy to understand effectively. And I think critically is doing a lot of service there to essentially say we're applying the tools of critical thinking to evaluate the reasons that you think something is true, which is in essence doing that work. But I think it's not necessary to bake in all of that, in my view. In my view, it wasn't necessary to bake in and overly sort of load it up with all of this stuff, because I don't think this unfairly represents what we're doing. And I think it would be quite reasonable to say that if you'd achieved this, then I think you would have said, we could easily say you've had a good Street Epistemology conversation. If all you've done is achieve this and you've not done any of this other stuff, I don't know how far wrong you could really have been.
If I had a conversation that fit all of these criteria, except the person knew where I stood and I honestly reflected my own position, it would not qualify as Archer.
It wouldn't, because in order to meet the Archer standard, you have to have this as your objective and you have to adhere to the principles. So as we're about to now move into the principles, the first principle is agnostic. And the agnostic component here is that all claims need to be treated equally regardless of personal belief or opinion. So the first characteristic basically says, well, you could tell people what you believed if you wanted to at the beginning. I don't think that would necessarily qualify as contradicting its agnostic inquiry, But if the nature in which you explored the view was colored by the framing of your own opinion, then I think it wouldn't conform to the agnostic requirement, your agnostic principle. So I guess you could still tell people what you thought.
So the other day we had a conversation. Somebody came up during Spectrum that knew Reid, and Reid took the talking stick role and put me on the clipboard role, and then also asked me to step onto the Spectrum and defend my honest position or talk about my honest position. So I was not agnostic, but Reid was. Is one person being agnostic enough to make it work?
I think in terms of the street epistemology component, like who is doing the street epistemology in that interaction, like I'd say that that Reid would be doing the street epistemology, and therefore
so Reid was doing the archer, and we got credit for participation. Yeah,
I would say that. Yeah, and again, I think it's an interesting reflection that you could still tell somebody what your belief is. The principle only requires that you treat all the claims equally, as in you would hope that this is the component that would suggest that a vegan street epistemologist who is equally as good as a meat-eating epistemologist would explore the claim of whether somebody should or shouldn't be a vegan equally, with equal levels of honesty, and encourage the same levels of reflection and explore it without the bias. That's the ideal. This does not mean your personal views on all claims should be agnostic. That should be clear. So obviously, we don't want to create. That's just not possible. So we're not claiming that is possible.
If I did, I'd become the emperor for Douglas Adams.
Yes, exactly. You would be the ultimate ruler of everything.
Over a pencil.
Indeed. But your position should be irrelevant to the interaction. That's the key component, right? So we don't. Ideally, you shouldn't be entering into the conversation to the extent that your opinion is relevant. This removes the burden of implied or actual that a person needs to know the truth of a position before helping somebody else explore it, which I think is a really powerful component of this. That you don't have to know the answer even. So it's not even that we would remain agnostic as the answer, or possibly be concerned about our future changing of our minds, that we would then regret the conversation. But even if we don't know the answer, we can still honestly encourage somebody to reflect on, should I get married? Was a claim that I heard raised in a corner session, and I thought that was a great claim, right? And you could explore that claim. Let's set it out. I should not get married. Okay, let's explore that. What are the reasons? And there isn't maybe an answer to that anybody could really know for sure, but you can still help somebody explore those claims and those ideas.
We did that on live stream with Nathan from Digital.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking about. Yeah, exactly. Nathan. Nathan. He put me onto a great podcast, by the way. I need to thank him for that. He put me onto Decoding the Gurus, which is a fantastic podcast that I'd recommend. Anyway, every interaction is to start from as neutral a position as possible. Well, that would line it up nicely with Spectrum SE, in order to maintain a collaborative mindset, which I think is the key component. I'm worried that the neutrality of the position in the Spectrum SE becomes a little bit sort of fractured immediately. I mean, I guess in the interaction that you were participating in, Reid, in the video we just saw, you were literally stepping into the position. But I guess that you were able to ensure that, or at least hope that there would be a better collaborative mindset maintained because they were coming at this from an SE perspective as well, right?
Yeah, I revealed my position, but I did. I think I treated it equally, regardless of my position.
Yeah,
it would have been the same, even if I would not have put myself on a line.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The fairness was excellent in that example. And I think in Spectrum, the neutrality of the interviewer is far, far more critical than on table.
Why do you think that?
Because let's assume that there's more than one person. You have to be able to pull them in every direction and have them not think that you have a particular bias in the pull. I want to make you more sure. I want to make you less sure. I want to make you closer to that person. Tell me the reason why that person would say. It's all about comparing the different positions and looking for the reasons that would go in there. And if the person holding the talk, if the narrator, moderator, what am I going to call them, takes a position, it can be very disruptive immediately, because they will start interacting with you as if that was the case. Do people have souls? At 5 minutes, they ask for the steel man position, and I stand there and I delivered a couple of different ones from different lines, and the players immediately believed that I held that position and softened their pushback, and was willing to let it go and agree to disagree and all those kinds of things, and play the whole game out because they were convinced that was my position. Even though I textually and in very specific terms define that this is not necessarily my position. It was very compelling, I guess.
Yeah, the dangers of a steel man. It's like that.
Got away with that one, but man, is it easy for the person holding the microphone to get pegged on a side and have that bias influence people.
I just want to check in real quick with time. Sorry, I just want to check in because we've only got sort of 10 minutes left, and I don't think we've got a huge amount of documents to go through, but you guys are okay to overrun by a little bit?
Yeah.
You good, Dali? Perfect.
Yeah, I can do an extra hour if you want.
Fantastic. Let's. I don't think it'll take that, but appreciate it. So respectful. I think this is critical, and I think it's critical for reasons that people maybe don't think about as much. Always engaging in a friendly, respectful, polite way. Being disagreeable is a form of persuasion, in my view, and can lead to defensiveness. So if you are not being kind, if you're not being respectful, I think that is a form of persuasion. If there's a breakdown in rapport,
I have a comment about that.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, go for it.
I like the word civil rather than polite. That's one thing.
Ooh.
But it's also the way we're defining civil in the course. It could mean both charitable and disrespectfulness together, so that may be an issue. And then the next thing, being disagreeable is a form of persuasion. I would say but that may be the case, but also being friendly and respectful and civil or polite potentially could be even more persuasive.
That's a good point. I totally agree with you.
It's more likely to persuade them away from your position, which is, by the way, a very effective tactic. I think people are moved away from positions by bad reasons more than they are attracted to them for good reasons. So if I steel man an opposing position and I give you a really bad reason, and if you think that's the reason, I can push you away from that position.
That's the reason. Sorry, I'm so sorry, Dali. I was listening, but I tried to correct whatever Google thought this was wrong about this, and it suggested I should replace the word "way" with "war," which I thought was a little. I don't know what agenda Google seems to think I have for this. Sorry. I agree with you, but I think in the context that we're agnostic, I think maybe if we're trying to stick to agnosticism, to treat the conversation agnostically. Then I think it would be unreasonable. I think it would be okay to say that, okay, if I'm being disagreeable about whatever it is that you're saying, then it's almost like I'm dissuading you from saying it. Like, it's almost like I disagree with you. Whereas I think if I'm being polite and charming and very friendly with you, you could see that as encouraging of your view equally. So I guess that's the opposing view. But I don't, for some reason, it doesn't feel intuitively the same to me. And I think that's partly because human beings seem to run away from risk further than they run towards niceness.
Yeah.
So I think the impact of a negative experience is probably bigger than the positive biasing of a positive experience, if that makes sense.
The fear, uncertainty, doubt method of marketing is extremely effective at pushing people away from a position.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, you're saying being disagreeable is a form of persuasion. Yes. And I'm wondering if in this overall, are you saying persuasion is necessarily a naughty?
Yeah, persuasion would be a bad thing. Yeah.
Okay.
I want to avoid persuasion specifically, because I think the moment we are persuading, we're no longer treating the claim agnostically, right? And so that would be sort of contradicting the formal rule. It doesn't necessarily
separate persuasion about the claim from persuasion to critically think.
here's where I think the confusion might be. We definitely want to persuade people to critically think, so that is valid, and I think I addressed that in a minute. But here's where I think the confusion might be. Like there are definitely ways in which you could be disagreeable that weren't necessarily reflective of what's being spoken about, right? So not all disagreeableness is persuasion, negatively or otherwise. But disagreeableness could be a form of persuasion, right? So you could, if you're dismissive of a person's position or treating it unkindly, they may feel like you're pushing them towards changing that view particularly. So I guess it's just trying to call that idea out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I like civil, by the way, Reid, thank you.
Cool.
If there is a breakdown in rapport and rapport cannot be reestablished, then it's better to end the interaction. A disagreeable experience might indicate to a person that the act of exploring an idea is disagreeable and make them less open to doing so in the future in direct opposition to our objective. And I think that's the most important reason to have a good, positive interaction. We're asking people to explore things that they're not used to exploring sometimes, or challenging them to open up and discuss things that are important to them. And I think if they have a bad experience doing that, that's not going to end up with more openness in the world. It's going to end up with more closeness.
Could you define the term disagreeable in this paragraph? I see
Something that you didn't
significant possibilities, and I'm maybe missing it.
If you come away with a negative experience, I guess.
So
a negative experience would be disagreeable.
Rapport.
Yes.
Disagreeable is direct to rapport. It's not about disagreeing with the person on their claim.
No. Yes. Maybe that's perhaps an unfortunate confusion that I should address then. Yes. Disagreeable is just a way of saying rapport has broken down and it's become an unpleasant, no longer been a pleasant experience.
A combative tone, maybe.
I think the first one gives me in context something that sounds like me defending the opposing position.
Yeah, so it's a disagreeable experience, I guess, is the thing that we're describing here. But I guess if we could conflate disagreeable with disagreeing.
This is a niggle that may not.
No, it's a good niggle. These sort of language traps end up making people like who maybe misinterpreted that, and then they come away with a different idea. So yes, that's I'll look at correcting that bit of language.
I have this brain problem. I'm hyperliteral.
No, I don't think that's necessarily a problem. Although you will struggle with the dictionary definition of literal. So as it now apparently also literally means not literally. So there you go. So charitable, listen carefully. The principle of charity, I think, is again a really fantastic guide to interactions. And it's one I think goes a little bit undersold in the community. But I think it's absolutely massively important. So listen carefully to what our conversation partner is saying. Make a genuine effort to understand their position. Always assume the best possible intention, motives, and interpretation. Steelman your conversation partner's position whenever possible. Adopt a collaborative mindset again, where you are working with your conversation partner to explore their views, not competing. Never take advantage of a cheap shot or call out mistakes in a manner that might demean the conversation partner. That last part is not worded fantastically well, but I think the general impression is right. So yeah,
I like everything except the comma after Steelman. It confuses me.
Oh yeah, that's weird.
And Steelmanning potentially means adding things that they didn't say to make their argument better.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Whenever possible. Okay.
Whenever possible. Yeah. So you represent a version of what they're trying to say that's a gooder version of their argument that's maybe even better than the one they presented, and make sure that they agree with it. That's the requirements of Steelmanning.
Always apologize and take the humility. If you add words, put that on yourself.
Yeah.
I'm adding words here. Tell me if I'm getting this wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, if they don't, so it's really, I don't know if it's worth maybe calling out the process of Steelman more specifically, but yeah, if you do attempt to Steelman somebody's position,
not a teaching document.
Exactly, but yeah, if you do attempt to Steelman somebody's document, it's absolutely critical that they accept your Steelman version of it, so you've not accidentally made a straw man. Okay, honest. So be intellectually honest. engage in rhetoric or persuasion. The ends do not justify the means. Be open about what you're doing, and do not chase victory. It's quite a slight. There's perhaps not quite enough in there to really qualify. But I think it's hard to define what the work honest is doing in here as clearly. I think a general sort of layperson's interpretation of honest will suffice. Don't be dishonest. I think we know when we're being dishonest, so don't do that. Be intellectually honest, I guess, and not engaging in rhetoric or persuasion. So don't try to bamboozle your conversation partner. You're not trying to get to a particular goal, and getting your conversation partner to a position is not worth having at any cost, right? There are cheap ways of getting there, and it's better that they get there the good way.
Okay, so I'm hearing bamboozle connected to like tricking, trapping, sneaking up on, springing a trap, not being transparent, those kinds of things.
Yeah, using loaded
I
language.
That one on honest. Now, rhetoric or persuasion. Now I'm stuck on what persuasion means again, because I do want to persuade for critical thinking, and I don't want it to if I could say persuasion about their claim.
So I see persuasion as different to the enacting. So I guess I'm seeing like persuasion as like the attempt to get somebody to a conclusion through means that are not their own rational reflections, right? So I could persuade you that it's a great, like I could temporarily make you think like buying the car is a fantastic idea for you, right? And I can use rhetoric and I can use various techniques to make you honestly think in that moment that, hey, what you are choosing that you want to do is buy the car. So that would be dishonest.
Take a thought experiment with me.
Mm-hmm.
You are considering a purchase of significant financial, I don't know, that's house or a car or whatever it is. It doesn't matter for the thing. It's a significant thing enough that you are willing to expend a little money on going to a financial analyst of whatever stripe you're deciding is important.
Mm-hmm.
And they do an analysis that is sufficiently compelling to you that you base your decision on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did they persuade you?
It would depend on how they presented their argument, though, would it not? Like, if
this is the bare minimum ideal thing that changes your mind, it's exactly the perfect thing that you were hoping to pay for.
So I guess maybe the word in this example then persuasion is not sufficient in and of itself. Like the problem.
I want a separate word for that kind of ideal changing of your choices based upon input that you are very welcoming and is very receptive and avoids the negative connotation, I think, of the persuasion, while still achieving a change of mind or making the right decision.
Yep, I agree. I think I hear what you're saying. I mean, like anybody presenting you with a great case and an honest, rational, coherent case will be persuasive, hopefully, if you're open to hearing that and understanding it. And that is persuasion of a kind. I definitely am contextualizing persuasion very negatively because I think that it gives too broad a license to other, like there is a negative form of persuasion.
Yeah.
Again, you could make the same argument for rhetoric. Rhetoric is the philosophical art of using language to make a persuasive point, like using flowery prose or using you could even argue that being respectful is a form of rhetoric, right? Because people are more likely to respond positively to you if you're being polite and civil, right? And so you could argue that that's a form of rhetoric. So rhetoric is the art of persuasion. I lost my place here. So yeah, maybe this needs some thinking about, but I struggle to. I guess I'm struggling to find good generalized terms for the space. So if you have some, that would be great.
And you define persuasion a certain way. It's like using something that's not aligned with their own rational critical thinking faculties or something, right?
Yeah, I think what we're aiming for is reflection and like critical reflection is what we're aiming for. And I think anything that's persuasive of anything that's not critical reflection would be negative in my view in this space.
If I said, what's the fallacious rhetoric, which to me is rhetoric that convinces for bad reasons.
Yeah,
it's true because it rhymes.
Sophistry.
Sophistry. Yeah.
Sophistry. Yeah. That would be fallacious rhetoric. Because if I remember a Christopher Hitchens phrase that is the right thing to put in here, am I using a rhetorical flourish because I'm speaking with my sentence reversed or something? I don't know. And I don't want to throw out the entire rhetoric with the bathwater or everything that could be covered by it unless I have a better term, or I can define a term for that thing that's acceptable that some might call rhetoric.
Right. Yeah, it's difficult. I think it's partly sitting within how people would use what people would call out as persuasion versus, I don't think it would be reasonable in your bank manager example or your financial expert example. I think you could totally linguistically, soundly, and honestly say that person persuaded you to change your view. But I don't think you would call it. I don't think people would call it out as persuasion in natural parlance. I think they would say,
better word?
I was convinced, or that they showed me, or they told me that this is what would happen, so I'm not going to do it, right? I think when people use the term persuasion, it invariably carries with it, I think, the negative context. And that's not, I'm not saying that this is baked into the definition of the word. I just think this is a common parlance use of it. You only describe something as persuasion with a slight, at least a hint of that sort of negative, like to be persuaded is not the same as being convinced, for example. Like you could convince me of something being true, or you could persuade me that something is true. The latter, so to convince me that something is true feels like I'm judging your reasons, and I've now adopted your mindset. I've adopted your view. But to be persuaded that something is true means that I just feel like I can't argue it anymore, and I've given up, and I'm gonna go along with what you've said.
That's interesting a term, at least for the purpose here. You're familiar with Veritasium?
Yes, the YouTube channel, yeah.
I think his work, Derek's work, is the example of the positive thing that you're calling convincing. Yeah. So I'm going to say Veritasium persuasion.
Veritasium persuasion. We could just say
it is the positive.
Yeah. I think
or
that
Veritasium convincing if the word persuasion is just poison.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Yeah, I think it definitely needs to be thought out in the context of this definition, because I don't want this to be dishonest, but at the same time I'm really concerned that words like persuasion open too many doors for misinterpretation. So if the concept of Veritasium persuasion was better understood, or at least we could define what characteristic it was that offered, that would be great.
Let me drop the baggage and I'll coin my term as Veritasium convincing.
Veritasium convincing, yeah.
This is tough
to put a word on it.
This is tough for me because in the course we're defining persuasion as the attempt to change someone's minds without coercion. And I think SE is a really great intellectually honest process. So we're using this intellectually honest process, and through that they could potentially persuade themselves, almost like using their own rational faculties and their reflection to change their minds. And that was something they consented to. It was not coercive. They would like to maybe even continue doing it at a different time. But at the end of it, they were persuaded. They changed their minds without coercion. And that was all through an intellectually honest process. So it's hard to see a potential negative for it. But there is a dark side of persuasion. There are con artists. There are means of persuading people to do things and changing their minds that are completely coercive, potentially, or maybe are there non-coercive forms of persuasion that are bad? Could that be con artist stuff?
Are
Maybe.
there non what? Sorry, say that last sentence again. So I was amused at chat for a brief moment and I got distracted.
Are there
Are there-
non-coercive forms of changing people's minds that are bad?
Well, the problem is coercion is similar to persuasion in that sense, right? You could say all language is coercion in some sense, right? You could say, it feels like it could be coercing, seems like it has an element of force and threat to it, right? I think that would be fair, and I think that you could say, for example, guilting. So you could persuade somebody using guilt. Is that really force? Is that coercion? I mean, it is, but yeah.
The quintessential example is like a gulag or a brainwashing camp. That is a bad form of persuasion. That does change people's minds, but that's changing someone's mind with coercion. So maybe that doesn't even apply as persuasion. That's just brainwashing.
How do you spell coercion? Is that right? Coercion? Is that right? Oh, excellent.
We definitely don't want to brainwash anybody coercively.
In rhetoric or coercion, I think that's probably a fine for now. that certainly says what I needed to say. I think we don't want to coerce. We don't want
rhetorical coercion, maybe.
Well, I guess if
it's not, he's trying to say there's two categories, and I think you mean fallacious rhetoric as opposed to simple.
I mean, so what I actually mean is sophistry, and
okay,
and it's I don't want to say sophistry because
why not?
Oh, because I think that term's not familiar to people. Like I'm trying to keep this as relatively readable as possible, but you could argue that rhetoric in and of itself is probably not.
What's the definition of sophistry?
Oh well, the sophists were so the sophists were basically ancient Greek lawyers. I guess you would hire them to come and argue your case, and they got a bad reputation because they were very persuasive, and so they could tell you that they could tell you a bad thing was true and convince you of it.
The use of fallacious arguments, especially with the intention of deceiving.
Ragnar, rhetoric is the art of effective persuasion, speaking or writing effectively, and exploration of the figures of speech and the compositional techniques. Interestingly, and a definition of sophistry, the use of clever but false arguments, especially with the intention of deceiving. I don't think that's the entire definition of sophistry, but yes, I think that's a functional one for sure. One of the pleasant things is the figures of rhetorical speech are known as the flowers of rhetoric, which I always thought was quite beautiful because they're seen as these beautiful little things that you could use, these little clever techniques of language that would encourage people to feel emotionally persuaded by an argument. Things like alliteration is one of the flowers of rhetoric, for example. People feel that that's a useful indicator of some meaning. So yes, anyway, I'm not sure. But I think honest is, I think broadly speaking, I don't think we're disagreeing with the idea. I think we're just disagreeing with the definition here. Like it needs to be honest, and we sort of have I think a reasonably coherent idea about what honest means, but it definitely needs some language tuning here. But yeah.
I'm so far all behind your idea, and the only niggles I have are, is that the better word?
Yeah. I want to actually. I mean, thinking about it honestly, rhetoric is probably too esoteric a term for me to. I would ideally be able to sort of make it more simplistic. But yeah, okay, we'll come back to that. I'll definitely. All of this needs some language parsing for sure. Epistemology. So it's necessary to focus on epistemology. Focus not on what a person thinks is true, but why they think it is true and how they know those reasons to be reliable. Is that a good enough version of epistemology for our use?
Well, we are focusing on what a person thinks either is true or false, and the reasons for thinking it is either true or false.
I think we get a claim, and then we try to understand the reasons for they support that claim, or the reasons that they believe that claim to be true, and then we focus on those reasons. We're not really focusing on the conclusion, right? I think it's not to say we don't care about what they think is true. Like that's the starting point. But the thing that the place where we do most of our epistemology, our work in the conversation, is the reasons.
Yeah, there's like a hierarchy of focus. We focus somewhat on what the person thinks. We get their definitions of it and want to understand what it is. But then we want to emphasize focusing on why they think it is true, but then even more so, how we can tell those reasons are good reasons.
Yeah. So that's pretty much exactly what this is saying. Well, I think it's saying, so we're not focusing on what they think is true. That's not to say we don't care about it, but it's not the attention. That's not the place where we're doing the work.
Our goal is over there, but we have to map a map of here so we can make a map of the road to get over there.
Right. Yeah. So we want to know why they think it's true. So what are the reasons? So we don't dismiss so they're not going to say, well, I believe X, and then we say, okay, well, that's not true. Like that's not where we do our work, right? We do our work on the, okay, so what is the reasons you feel that that's true? Like can we identify the best reason, etc. And then we do the work on, okay, so how do you know that those are reliable reasons to justify the position? Like how have you understood that relationship between the things you're claiming and how much they support your conclusion? So I think that says it, but maybe it's backwards or maybe not
and
clearly.
Specifically, their reasons to justify their level of confidence. They can be, the higher the confidence, the more justification, the higher quality of the justification you need, the better the reasons.
Yeah, so there's something like proportioning your confidence to the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Is even validating their proportionality of confidence. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just throwing words out now. I love the idea.
I can't spell it the best of times, and apparently my brain just shuts off when I know people are watching. Like I overthink it, and then my brain just flips out, and it's just like I know I'm misspelling the word there, and there are a bunch of people watching me do that. And I'm just gonna have to deal with it. Justify their confidence in their position. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, I think that again. I think all of this could do with some word tweaking, but yeah, I like that. That's fair. I guess, and then the final point is reflection. So Archer aims to inspire genuine and meaningful reflection in our conversation partner, in line with the principles of critical thinking. So this is like a key component of this. Like we are defining a very specific type of reflection. So it's not just like, I'm going to think about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. What a fantastic and interesting time. I will just meditate on that idea for a while. That's not the kind of reflection we want to induce. We want to induce meaningful reflection, which this is definitionally requiring that is done with the principles of critical thinking in mind.
Will people know what those principles are?
I think probably if challenged, people probably couldn't define them, but they probably would have a reasonable understanding of what they might feel like. Most people don't understand the rules of logic, but they will happily proclaim something to be illogical. So I think in common language.
Yeah, having valid and sound arguments or cogent arguments.
Yes. Again, this is probably going to need a language pass, I think, to sort of make it a little bit more accessible. It's not, I don't think it's too far away, but I think, it's a fair criticism.
Cool.
So these next bits is an acknowledgement of bias, and I think this is an important condition to add here, which is, although it is agnostic as to the claim, Archer is biased in favor of claims held for rational reasons, where rational critical thinking has been applied to the epistemology of the claim. Now, I think a lot of people talk about bias in SE, and what they often mean is like an atheistic bias or a particular positional bias. And I think that it's important to, whilst I think it's important that Archer is definitionally not biased in that way. I think it's still important to acknowledge that there is a bias, right? Not all positions are going to be treated equally with these tools and with this approach. So if that's, and I think if that's perfectly reasonable to take in as a bias. What do you guys think to that? Is there a section in the course that deals with SE biases? I'm sure there must be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
Acknowledgements of limitations, and again, I think this is useful because I think some people might I think a lot of people see SE as a sort of a panacea, like it's a solution to a lot of language problems and conversational problems. And I think there are places where for example, I think one of the examples here is like debate is a good one. I think people want to see SE, they might confuse SE with a tool for debate or think that SE can be useful in debate. And I don't think it is particularly. I don't think it's the tool I would reach for if I was in a debate. I might adopt some of the principles. I might try to adopt some of the mindset. I might use some of the tools perhaps. But I don't think SE as a principle, as a conversational approach, is the right thing to bring to a debate-style conversation. Similarly, I think that SE might reasonably be, well, as it says here, so inspiring reflection in a person is a difficult thing to measure. Success can be mistaken for failure, and failure mistaken for success. There is no known reliable method to measure the effectiveness of Archer beyond the anecdotal reporting, and such reporting is limited. This doesn't mean that anecdotal reporting is irrelevant to supporting the idea that Archer is effective, simply that no stronger evidence exists. I think that's a reasonable acknowledgement. I know that there's been some conversation about some academic explorations of street epistemology more broadly. I don't know if anybody has any experience with that.
We're working on it. We are we are in contact with a researcher and hopefully going to do something very soon.
Cool. Awesome. Well, hopefully there will be hopefully this will be proven wrong at some point, and there will be some. We'll be having a short 5-minute conversation, and then there'll be just a very quick MRI scan just to make sure that your brain is sufficiently changed, and then we'll be. you thought laying out those little lines for Spectrum FE was a time-consuming exercise. You wait until you have to spin up the MRI before you can. Okay. So Archer aims to encourage a person's reflection on the reasons that they hold a position. As a result, Archer will be less effective in engaging with people who have spent time reflecting. This is a slightly controversial one, I think. And I went on to say that this is not a problem and should not be seen as a weakness of the approach. A car might be an effective way to travel to New York, and it is no less effective if it can't help those who are already in New York achieve this goal. And what I'm trying to suggest here is that I think in conversations, like people want to feel that SE is always going to be, if you're good at SE, you should be able to immediately encourage somebody to meaningfully reflect on a position that they're holding. And I think that that's not a reasonable expectation of this approach. I think that if you're talking to an expert in quantum physics about some particularly nuanced and complex idea within quantum physics, and somebody who spent their life researching quantum physics, I think you're going to find it incredibly difficult to, in a short, brief conversation, encourage them to reflect differently upon their reasons why they hold their particular view in the field of quantum physics. I think it's not impossible, but I just think it's massively less likely.
I think that analogy would work better if it's not so much that people who are already in New York know how to get from one place to New York. It's like, it's people who could get to New York from any capital in the, continental United States if they wanted to,
Yeah, I guess the idea is that we're trying to achieve a change in a mindset. And if somebody already has that mindset, then your inability to affect that change, definitely isn't going to be a weakness of the system. It's just that, well, they've already reflected. Even if, so for example, I think SE and Archer would be less effective in encouraging somebody to reflect if they are a theist who has spent a lot of time studying and researching and just fully embracing the landscape of apologetics and biblical history. And that's not because of their position is any more or less true. Again, this is an important point, but it does mean that they've spent an awful lot of time reflecting. And therefore, it's not going to be as easy to get them to just notice, I haven't really thought about that, which is kind of one of the key components of, I think, a good SE conversation, is to point out to somebody, you're holding a position, but you haven't really thought about the reasons, perhaps, or maybe you haven't really noticed something about your thinking about those reasons.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think it's a problem. So I think academics, and I think apologists, for example, and again, perhaps that would lead to like potentially even in the space of a debate. I don't think SE is the right tool, and I wonder if this is in part like I think there are sort of stepping stones like from SE where you could say, well, like something like Doug is doing, like Pine Creek is doing a one step further towards weaponizing these tools for a slightly more combative discussion where you're dealing with people whose views are maybe a little bit more thought through, or not thought through is probably not the right way of framing it, but like they've got a harder set of opinions about their views.
Mm-hmm.
What was that, Dali? Sorry?
They are more invested.
They're more invested, yeah, absolutely, yeah. More doxastically closed for sure, and not knowingly doxastically closed, but maybe. So yeah, I think it's an interesting characteristic.
If the entire goal is to talk to somebody who, again, I'm thinking chapter 7, somebody who's stuck in a position, there's an advantage to the audience. If the audience can recognize that they're stuck in the position, it will change the audience's mind. And it doesn't matter if it changes the person's mind who you're speaking to, if you're reaching to the audience. And all you have to do is be nice enough to be able to keep doing it. Yeah. Debate is a whole different game.
Okay, number 3, Archer claims to encourage a person's reflection, and only the conversation partner can do that reflection. It will be less effective with people who are unwilling to be open or engage in reflection, sometimes known as being doxastically closed. Whilst there are ways to encourage openness, such as listening and being open, respectful, and empathetic, we should never try to force somebody to be open, nor should we consider it our failure if they are not. Now, I think that's important, but I also think that might be like, oh, well, this was a successful conversation because I either got them to reflect or they didn't reflect, and therefore it was their fault that they didn't reflect. So either way, I did good. Like maybe this is setting up a too easy win condition for us, but I do think it's a useful thing to notice that some people are not going to be as open to it, and that's not entirely upon you. It's not like as somebody trying to learn how to do SE for the first time to try to work out how can I approach this, and maybe. I mean, there are definitely conversations I've had that have just been absolutely uphill battles, and it's been, very difficult to make any meaningful progress. And it's been pushed back every step of the way, no matter how polite and carefully I'm sort of exploring this. And I think that if somebody who's brand new to SE is trying to and that was perhaps their first conversation was one of those sorts of conversations. Then I think they could be incredibly disheartened. And I think that it's really important to recognize that, we aren't doing something for somebody so much as we're encouraging them to do something for themselves. And if they don't want to do that, then that's their decision. And there's nothing we can or should do to force that.
Yep. Although I think SE is pretty much the best way of interacting with someone who is doxastically closed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, I don't know any other ways of having. Yeah, I think it is a good way, and I think it's because it deals with listening to people's reasons and forcing them to articulate those reasons and encouraging them to think about those reasons. I think is different to the head-on, full-on frontal attack challenge that normally they encounter. Mm-hmm. So I think that's true. Archer invokes rational critical thinking and explores methods used to hold a position. Therefore, it will be ineffective in addressing positions held for reasons that are knowingly irrational or outside the realm of critical thinking. There is a caveat here, which is when encountering such positions, it can be helpful to question the value of holding a position that is knowingly irrational or outside the realm of critical thinking. Most people operate by applying critical thinking in all areas of their lives, whether they know it or not. The motivations behind creating special cases for a position can be a great place to explore. So I think if somebody wants to say that, for example, a presuppositionalist position, if they want to adopt that worldview, then it's going to be probably very difficult, I think, for SE to necessarily help somebody with a presuppositionalist mindset from noticing that there's anything they need to change about their worldview. Like, I think that's going to be a very difficult person to speak to. But I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. Do you guys think differently? Am I missing some SE ninjutsu that we could?
I think there's a different set of tools to focus on. Was the more of the psychosocial motivations for being a presuppositionalist. I would focus less on the epistemology and focus more on psychosocial stuff. If I was having a conversation with that kind of person, and I think that would help them reflect on potentially their reasons for being in that position, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was touching on with the motivations behind creating this special case. Like, why you? I guess that that's not even just the motivations for creating the special case so much as, why are you holding these rule sets, or you're taking these foundational? Why are you making these assumptions, or taking on these particular foundational beliefs?
The term critical thinking in the main paragraph, not the A. Is doing all the heavy lifting in terms of defining what is or isn't okay. That's the fulcrum, critical thinking. So I would welcome a very clear statement of what critical thinking entails. I think from context, I hear that it entails that there are a set of epistemologies that we are biased to accept and a set of epistemologies that we are biased to reject. That hasn't been explicitly stated what those epistemologies are. And it sums into critical thinking is at least agreeing upon something like the subset of the important epistemologies. Yeah,
I agree. I think a definition, a clear outline of what we mean by critical thinking would be useful. I think I will add that to the document. I think and have as open a definition of that as I can. I think is a good thing to add for sure. Yes, because if we're not careful, we could say critical thinking is just what Will thinks is true, and and then we're back into all the problems.
Well, cool. It's what the author meant.
It's what the author meant, exactly. Yes. So this document continues with a few other things. I won't read the rest of it out, but talking about the mindset, progress, not perfection, I think is an important characteristic. We want to have better conversations. We're not aiming for perfection, and this touches on this principle I mentioned earlier, which is, even if you don't stick to the conversational principles, even if you're not, doing, we just want to have better conversations. And so, we're not saying that any conversation that doesn't stick to these principles would be a bad SE conversation or is wrong or is just terrible. If you make a mistake and you accidentally, trip up over some of these ideas, don't worry. It's nobody's going to get this perfect. There is no perfect. We're just aiming for better. Inspiring reflection, not changing minds. So this is that part I mentioned before, which is like touching on this idea that we're not explicitly trying to change minds. We're just looking for genuine reflection. You may be wrong about what you believe. Again, we covered that already. This is just the idea that you're not going to regret applying this method at any point because it's unagendered. Even if you change your mind, even if you're like very convinced of position A and then suddenly become very convinced of not position A, then ideally, if you're adopting this method properly, then you wouldn't really regret any conversations you had underneath it. The collaborative mindset is very important, I think, hugely important, and should be encouraged at all points. Like, you're working together. It's not a zero-sum game. We covered that also. And this is an interesting one. Success is not visual, so don't look for it. This is just a warning, I guess, to people who are chasing those big fat celebratory tada aporia moments where the confetti falls from the sky and the banners fly across the room and everybody's you just get those wonderful, and it's the fantastic video moment, for example, and we've seen them, we know what they look like, and you can have these wonderful, real, heartfelt, emotional connections to people with their lovely aporia. But sometimes I think that you can have none of those indicators and still have a really meaningful impact on somebody's worldview and ways of seeing the world. So it's a danger to think just because you just had a civil conversation with somebody and walked away and have been thoroughly unconvinced that they really thought about that. It would be a mistake to assume that you haven't had an impact and it hasn't been a success. Notes on the term of interlocutor, which I've banned. And I encourage everybody else to ban as well, because it's and one of the things that I pointed out in this document is that it's a single extra syllable, people. It's not even that much shorter. It's a single conversation partner is exactly one syllable greater than the term interlocutor. And so I thoroughly recommend banning the term interlocutor and
We've
swapping it out
switched
for
in
conversation
the course
partner.
as well.
Yes. Okay, finally, I've had an impact.
I've been using terms like claimant and player when I'm referring to. Is that current?
Apparently now porn as well, which
Yeah, I don't mean that at all. I mean, I refer to the claimant or the interviewer, just because those are the closest terms that aren't jargony.
yes.
Claimant is a little weird, but at least it's clear.
And thank you, by the way, asking how. Thank you for. I just noticed this CP and like IL and SE. Like, try to avoid those as much as possible. Like, somebody's always new to reading this stuff, so make it as accessible as you can. You've got no idea what might be somebody's entry point to this stuff is, so try to use descriptive terms. Aporia. So there's a bit about aporia. Aporia is not the objective. False aporia. Some notes on this. Also a suggestion of not resolving aporia. I'm so bad at this. I feel so terrible for my conversation partners when they are in this moment of just like, you just get them, they feel lost in their little, and I know the right thing to do is to let them experience that and reflect on it. And I guess it's just down to everybody's intuitions to a certain extent about when that should be resolved. But yeah,
that's on a scale from Monk to Pine Creek.
What a fascinating scale that we could also plot many interesting things, no doubt. Yes. So yeah, that's it. So that's Archers. So this is the idea of this opinionated framework for inspiring reflection. So in theory, we could have this conversation. Now, I did promise at the beginning, when I started reading this, I would mention that Ragnar very, very usefully pointed out a similar objection, I think, to or a question that you raised as well, Reid, which is Archer just a sort of a slightly aggressive term? Like, does it come with a sense of violence and weapon? And it's a perfectly interesting reflection. And I think now Ragnar, I know, is in chat, so perhaps you could remind me, what was the I that you proposed? I think we replaced agnostic with something else. I've completely forgotten what it was. It was like impartial, I think it might have been. And he came, and that would make the acronym richer, which is interesting.
Imagine that you just left it exactly like it was, and it shows a different graphic of scaffolding holding up a bridge that doesn't have the keystone placed yet.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't represent the acronym. It's just like this
no, it's
visual
exactly
metaphor.
The acronym. It's the person who's building the arch has to build a scaffolding to allow the thing to then be able to bear its own weight.
Oh, I see. An archer
bridge over
as a bridge builder. Huh.
It's
interesting.
A bridge builder.
Interesting.
So,
interesting.
Not all bridges are arch bridges.
But
that is cool.
This is an example of somebody who builds only arch bridges. They're an archer.
No one would think a bridge builder when they hear archer, though.
Right.
So
it makes it more searchable. No, that's not true.
I did like the idea of richer. I did like the idea of having a richer conversation, which suggests something. I thought that was very good. It really has plagued me, though, because I think phonetically Archer somehow feels better as an acronym. I also feel like I like impartial as well, and so I think the visual metaphor for richer is hard to create a nice representation for. I'm not so convinced that the term archer has such an I don't know if the negative of the sort of weapon metaphor is really as bad as it feels.
If you take away the archery situation, then I lose this other graphic that I have a bookmark in that has to do with, maybe you've seen, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's a star chart where you show the benefits of something in multiple directions and it connects the dots, and you're sort of like looking at the area under something, though they might be kind of poor at this but really good at this, or they might be
I know what you
similar,
mean.
but
Yeah,
almost
yeah, yeah.
Now, in our case, we reverse the scale because the perfect conversation is the bullseye. So the smallest deviation from the ideal becomes our sin, and you have 6 directions.
Did you say sin?
You can score. Sins, yes, because in archery, it's the target, and each is sin 1, sin 2, sin 3, sin 4.
Oh, okay.
Which is the actual original meaning from sin I learned in Judaism.
Huh.
Christians have a different meaning for sin than Jews.
I guess they must do. Yeah, that's interesting. I think. Somebody. So Ragnar's got enrich. Interesting. Empathetic, neutral, rational, introspective, charitable, and honest. But there's no epistemology in there. So I guess we could use that first E.
Do the first E, yeah.
I think I'm up for a debate. So here's a few things that I would like to suggest. Like, firstly, like, none of this is like true or real. It's just my reckon stuff, I think. I think what I would suggest is that if people broadly could agree that this is useful enough, a framework, and once we've tightened the language, what I would suggest is, like, it could be something we could use in conversation, right? So how Archer was this conversation, you could say, or how would you score this on the Archer standard, right? And we could have those conversations about those things. And then
what you're doing here is creating a scoring system.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a framework.
You're defining figure skating.
Yeah, it's setting up a way in which you could potentially, rank interactions, or you could give people constructive feedback, and it would only be applicable if they wanted to adhere to the Archer standard, right? Like, you would only be relevant for people that wanted to. If your goal in SE was to persuade somebody to become a vegan, then it would be unreasonable for you to then have to be held to the Archer standard. You could still arguably, you could say you were still doing SE, but you couldn't say you were doing Archer SE. Like, that would not be a claim you could maintain, because your goal was not the goal of Archer SE, right? You've got a different objective.
Yeah, your star is too big, at least in one direction.
Right. So yeah, and if you felt like the objective was not to inspire inspire reflection, but was for you just to learn as much as you can about the person you're speaking to, and so that the focus was you learning, for example, that also would not be Archer SE, because you're not in reflection is a component of the objective here, and it's a principle in the process.
If I learn something that goes against Archer. Is that what you said?
No.
Sorry,
if your objective is only to learn, like, if your objective is not to inspire reflection in the person you're speaking to, then you're not doing Archer SE. Like, you could learn things for sure, absolutely, but if that's your goal,
just asking them to tell me what they know in a detailed way with asking for in-depth questions in response causes reflection in them to some degree.
Yep.
And then if they can even elucidate the reasons behind there, we've established an example of them reflecting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how many layers deep you get to go, cool, but I would say even that qualifies as positive evidence of reflection.
We've seen examples where readers asked, I think he's gotten to like question 2 in his script and blown somebody's mind already, right? So going through the motions of the whole process is not necessarily useful even, right? Like I always use the tier example. Is faith a good reason to believe something? And like, that was the end of the conversation now, because the girl's life had just blown up and she was thinking about that, like, and I think that was a good example. And there was no point, I think, in continuing. In fact, I think that you'd already achieved the goal to some extent, and I think, like, knowing when to end it. Diminishing returns, yeah, very likely.
Maybe diminishing a crescendo, mitigating the effect because you don't leave it as the last thing in the conversation, the memorable thing.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that you could there can be other things that can happen whilst you're doing this, right? But like Archer is specifically about your intent and how you approach exercising that intent, right? So if you learn something, for example, to go back to that example, right? If you learn something through the interaction about the other person's view, that's great. In fact, I'd even argue that that's necessary, in order for you to be honestly charitably encouraging somebody to reflect on their reasons, right? You need to understand their position, right? So you need to be respectful, you need to understand it, and that's a big part of charity. So you need to learn, but if that's where your journey stops, okay, I've got it, I know what you think now, I'm gonna just leave, then that's not Archer SE, right?
Okay.
That wouldn't meet the criteria of you actually having the goal of encouraging the other person to reflect on those reasons and do that reflection. So so some people genuinely within the community honestly believe that SE for them is just about them learning what other people think, that's the primary goal for them. And I'm certainly not going to stand anywhere and say that that's wrong, because there's nowhere I can point to say that that's not true. And if they want to say that that's SE for them, then cool. But there is a framework now that would say that that's not Archer SE. So
what is it lacking? What would you need to add to their conversation for it to qualify?
Their goal would have to be different. They would have to want to inspire reflection in the person that they're speaking to, encourage critical reflection in the person that they're speaking to on the reasons why they believe something to be true.
What is the minimum viable product of reflection?
What is the minimum viable? The minimum viable product of reflection.
The minimum
that's
qualify.
Yeah. That's up to you. I mean, like you could have a hugely impactful, conversation, or a very superficial conversation. I don't think there's a threshold by which we would say. You could say, I think you could have maybe explored that further, or maybe encourage. So one of the examples I gave in the idea that the method, the approach is not the important here, is the idea of a poster campaign. So I think you could achieve Archer through a poster campaign. And I think the way you would do that would be you could create a poster that would inspire somebody to reflect on a position that they might hold to be true. And I think as long as you were stuck to the principles, which I think you could do, you could be agnostic, you could be unopinionated, you could just say, this is a thing to think about and notice. You don't have to say what the conclusion would be. You could be respectful, so it wouldn't be an impolite poster. It wouldn't be swearing. It wouldn't be uncharitable. It wouldn't be caricaturing. Charitable, it wouldn't be trying to straw man what other people might think. It wouldn't be trying to invoke rhetoric it's not appealing to people who already agree with your position to become motivated. It's actually honestly trying to invoke epistemological reflection in other people. You could do a poster campaign that would achieve that goal. That might make somebody see that poster, go home and think, why do I think that? Like, what does that mean? Like, I've never really thought about that before, and start to think about their views. And I think that would be brilliant. You could write a computer program to do this. You could do all kinds of different things. Now, you could say, well, could they have reflected more in that moment? Maybe. You could be more or less successful at achieving that goal. But I think it's perfectly valid for you to have an interaction and end it when you feel comfortable.
Would you agree that if I can make 1/10 of as much difference per person for 1/100th the cost per person, and be able to amplify that to a lot of people, that would be a worthwhile goal?
I think encouraging people to reflect to any degree more than they currently do is a worthwhile goal. That would be my opinion here.
So then the question just becomes a question of efficiency. How much does a greater change from the personal interaction and attention matter relative to this other thing? And there's a huge cost. Obviously, I think if you have both of them working together, that's the best thing.
So one of the components of SE that I think is I'd look, if the goal is to encourage people to reflect on the reasons they think things are true, right? Like actually have a sense of that. You could say, right, what if we just all, instead of making all these videos, what if we just did release a national poster campaign, and we got it very cleverly worded and interestingly worded and put it out there. Now more people think. Part of the thing that probably wouldn't do as well would be to encourage people to encourage others to do this thinking. So one of the things that's quite interesting about the current street epistemology movement is that it's designed to do not just encourage people to reflect, but encourage those people to also come on board and start encouraging other people to reflect. It's a mimetic thing. It's a movement thing. It's growing. I'm hesitating to use the word viral, but like, you know, we want this to be an exponentially growing community of people who not are just reflecting more themselves on the reasons why they think things are true, but also going out there and encouraging others, having more meaningful conversations with others. So in actual fact, I think SE is probably quite a good use of the time if we can tune the tool set and get it more accessible to people and get people more confident in being able to go out there and do it. Then I think actually something like Archer and having these practice sessions and making more video content about SE hopefully will achieve this goal of, you know, not just converting one person in a conversation, but that video of that conversion or that not conversion. Sorry, this is me being tired talking, not this is lazy language, but checkmate SE, right? So anyway, the idea would be that video would inspire other people to go out there and do that same thing, right? And that the value of that becomes exponentially, you know, useful. So yeah, and I think that's a good thing. But so I think something like Archer and this sort of document, I think is short and sweet enough, hopefully, for it to be accessible to people. Now, people could say, okay, what is SE? And you could see something like this. And I know that other people have done similar examples. There've been other cheat sheets for SE and like how to approach the methods and things. But I think a lot of them, I guess I've been worried that a lot of them confuse method and objective, which I think is an importantly useful things to separate.
Yeah. Once the first 7 modules come out, the first phase of the course, I don't know if I would point people to this document because all of this would be in the course already, just in different places. We have a module for why doing SE, and the ethics related to SE is another one, and the mindset for doing SE is another one. And there's a bunch of this in this document that relates to why doing it, the ethics, and the mindset. But there's nothing about how, the actual steps in this. So there is another document. So I wanted to separate the two ideas. So firstly, I think the how is a specific method in some cases, right? So I actually have another document describing conversational Archer, which is the basic steps to go through an Archer style conversation and how to maintain it. So it's basically a description of the SE methodology with some of the Archer labels applied, essentially. So that's a separate document. And the reason why it's a separate document is I wanted to ensure that we weren't conflating the method with the objective. Because the how is just one way, right? Yeah. I mean, I don't know why we're doing the course in 2 different ways. You're just trying to restrict your certain non-persuasion version of SE to make sure it aligns with your ethical standard because you just find persuasion to be bad intrinsically.
I think there's been a good case for that not being the right framing, and so it's probably just a poor use of language on my part here. So I don't think it's intrinsically persuasion per se. I think the concept of persuasion is either too loosely defined for us to use it safely without invoking potential for people to use it for bad reasons. So, okay, I can persuade somebody to my cause using SE, so it is a tool for persuasion. That is not the right mindset, I think. So I think I'm using persuasion. So I guess in some senses, SE's course material sounds like it's using SE, the term persuasion, in a very positive context, and therefore it's dangerous. And I guess maybe I'm using it in too much of a negative context, therefore I'm closing the door to a rational interpretation of that word. And so maybe that language problem needs to be solved in some way.
I think we would mitigate any kind of danger, but based on the way we define it and how we're separating it out from the actual mindset and ethics.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the mindset and the ethics we're describing in the course, I don't think anything wrong would happen if your goal was potentially part of if persuasion was part of your goals. And we're trying to have reflection be the top priority, top goal if you ever do SE, and persuasion may come into it a little bit, but never the top priority. It's a nuanced thing. Or we may potentially remove persuasion entirely, and if we did that, then this would be entirely compatible with the current stuff in the SE course.
Well, I'm not entirely surprised. I mean, as I say, this is. I mean, a lot of my intuitions in the space have come through, you, myself, and others participating in the SE review sessions, for example. Like, what do we call out? What do we laugh at? what do we think is not ideal? When do we say, oh, that was very well done, that was a great question? What do we mean when we're saying those things? So I think a lot of it's come from that. So I don't think this is at odds with the community at all. And so the fact that it's echoed. It echoed in the course material is entirely unsurprising to me. And again, whilst I think a lot of people that I ask will all have various definitions of SE. I don't think anybody would disagree with this definition, for example, not wholeheartedly say, oh, this is entirely not relevant to SE. I think that would be very surprising. I think the vast majority of people probably would say, oh yeah, that's what I thought it was. I don't think it's like revolutionary in any sense.
Yeah, so now I just worry if it's superfluous once we have the course out.
Okay, so one of the things that I thought about was that the course material, as I've seen it, because I have seen module 1 and I've seen snippets of various other bits of modules, although this was a while ago, so I'm sure it has changed a lot since I've seen it. But the material was very long, so it was a very, I think module 1 when we saw it was like 50 pages or something long, and that was just the first module of what SE is. And I'm sure subsequent modules are at varying lengths, but this is a huge ask for somebody to engage in as a materials for the course. I think you've really got to want to know that, okay, I'm going to sit down and go through this. And I think that having a terser representation of the principles that can be referenced and adhered to, I think actually it has a great deal of benefit for onboarding people. And then if you want to learn more about the various components, then totally I could see that this being a jumping off point for people to then engage with the course material. But I think the acronym, I think the principles, and I think the definition are, well, that's certainly what I think of as SE. And I think that if they're reasonably echoed in the course material, then that's great. But if not, then I think it's still something that could be referenced in its own right. And seen separately.
Yeah, the course will be the main meat of the content, but then we'll have other learning materials based off of it. Like, for example, one-pagers with graphics that are very simplified and even probably more simple than this. And if you had like the first 4 module one-pagers, would you get any additional information from that here? Or would it be the same, just in a different format? I would assume they would be very similar.
I've only seen module 1 in an older state, so I'm not really. Yeah, you're the one that will tell me that.
Yeah, we've definitely cut back on a lot of module 1, and we've combined module 3 and 1, but still removed a lot. So it's going to be better, I think.
That's cool. Yeah. If this is completely made redundant by the course material, then that I don't see that as a bad thing. I guess this is as much as anything else. I guess this has been a sort of slightly cathartic exercise for myself to try to express, like, okay, I want to be able to say this is SE as far as I see it. This is what I'm defending when I defend SE. This is what I support when I say I'm supporting SE. I think this is important, and if people want to say, I think they will be as likely to say it against this as they would against the course. Oh, that's not what I think of as SE, or that's not why I use SE. Mm-hmm. Well, then I think they're welcome to say so. I think that one of the sort of escape hatches was this idea that this is a subset of SE, that other people could do other things that are still, that if you want to do them and say that they're SE. And I got, when I read module 1, I got a sense that there was a lot of that framing in the module writing itself, that that there wasn't anything exclusionary about the way the course was defining it. There was a lot of doors open for other people to say, hey, there's other ways of thinking about this. This is just the way we're setting out as our approach, right? But I don't know. I don't know how strongly that view is held.
Yeah, it's a great exercise to go through and clarify your thoughts. It's great, and I think it's very compatible with what we're going with in the course. So I think this is good stuff.
Awesome. I don't know about you guys, but I'm running on fumes, and this has been 3 hours, which is at least an hour more than I was hoping, planning, thinking it would be. But yeah, look, I really appreciate it. I'm going to continue to tweak the wording, and I'll also share this more broadly with everybody once I've tweaked the wording. I'll pump it out onto the Discord somewhere, no doubt, and let people take a look at it. But yeah, I definitely want to shout out Ragnar, especially, who's been great at sort of giving me good feedback on this, and a whole handful of other people whose names have completely left my brain that have also gone through this with me, and we've had conversations about with it. Sushi, for one, for sure, has gone through this with me, and also you guys for taking the time to go through this with me. I think this has been a really fun exercise, and hopefully it's been useful for people. But yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for a chat, and I'm so sorry for ignoring all of the chat messages. By the way, there have been so many great messages that I know I'm going to have to read them all later. But trying to read this and trying to read chat, like I just have to abandon chat, I'm afraid. I'm trying to have a conversation and read the doc. But thank you so much to everybody who's been actively chatting away in chat. So I will promise to go back and read those. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dali and Reid. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to plug or promote? Or
I love what you're
recommend?
doing. I want to pour love on it.
Thank you, Dali. I appreciate it. Same for both of you guys. Well, not so much Reid, to be honest with you.
Yeah, Dali and I have been going out to UCLA getting more content and footage, so expect more videos soon.
And you're not going to shout out whatever products you're using in your hair today. You're not going to give them the honest work that they deserve. The call out, I think it's.
I just wrote it down. I need to buy some more. I think it's Mitch something. I don't know.
Shameless plug indeed. Dali approves. Gentlemen, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Everybody in chat, you are lovely. Have great Fridays. Have great weekends. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe. And we'll see you next time, everybody. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.